She burned the wedding dress in the yard behind the church while the guests were still seated inside waiting for the ceremony to begin. Not slowly, not with hesitation. She struck the match on the heel of her boot, held the flame to the hem of the ivory silk her father had paid for with borrowed money, and she watched it catch. She stood there until the entire gown was nothing but ash and black smoke rising into the Montana sky. Then she picked up her carpet bag, which she had packed the night before and hidden beneath the floorboards of her bedroom, and she walked away from the church without looking back once. That was the morning Emily Carter stopped being afraid of what other people thought of her. It was also, though she did not know it yet, the morning her real life finally began. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell so you never miss another tale like this one, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Every comment, every city, every name, it means the world. Now stay with me, because what happens next in Autumn Ridge, Montana will change the way you think about fear, freedom, and what it truly means to be chosen. The stagecoach rolled into Autumn Ridge on a Thursday afternoon in late September of 1887, trailing a long ribbon of dust behind it across the flat Montana plain. Emily Carter was the last passenger to step down onto the unpaved street, and she did it the same way she did everything now, quietly, deliberately, without asking anyone's permission. She was 25 years old. She had 43 cents in her coat pocket, a change of clothes folded inside the carpet bag hanging from her left hand, a small notebook she had kept hidden for 2 years, tucked flat against her ribs inside her corset, and a name written on a folded piece of paper that she had carried since the morning she left Billings. Nathan Brooks, Autumn Ridge, Montana. Horses wanted. That was all she had. That was enough. The town was not large. One main street, 2 saloons, a general store, a church that needed painting, a telegraph office, and a livery stable that smelled of hay and manure from 50 yards out. The kind of town where everybody knew everybody and strangers were noticed before they had taken 3 steps off the stagecoach. Emily felt the eyes on her immediately. From the men sitting on the bench outside the general store, from the woman sweeping her porch 2 doors down, from the boy who stopped rolling his hoop in the street to stare at her with open curiosity. She did not slow down. She had learned a long time ago that slowing down when people stared only gave them more time to find something to say. She asked the stagecoach driver for directions to Brooks Ranch. He squinted at her from beneath the brim of his hat, looked her up and down, once the way men did when they were deciding whether a woman was worth talking to, and then he pointed west. "About a mile and a half out that way. You got someone expecting you?" "I expect myself," Emily said. "That's usually enough." She walked the mile and a half in just under 30 minutes. The road was dry and rutted from wagon wheels, and her boots were not made for long walks. They were town boots, low-heeled and thin-soled, better suited to polished floors than Montana dirt. By the time the fence line of Brooks Ranch appeared through the scrub brush, her feet ached and her hem was gray with dust. She did not stop to rest. She had stopped resting in other people's towns. She only rested in places she had chosen for herself. The ranch was larger than she had expected from the advertisement. The main house sat back from the road, solid and weathered, built from timber that had darkened with age to the color of old iron. 3 outbuildings, a large barn, a series of split-rail training pens running along the south side of the property, a water tank, a bunkhouse. Signs of real operation. Not a struggling homestead, but a working ranch that had been worked hard for a long time. There were men in the yard, 4 of them, near the largest training pen, and they were all looking at something inside the fence that Emily could not yet see clearly from the road. She unlatched the gate and walked toward them. She heard the horse before she saw him. Not the sound of hooves, the sound of terror given a voice. A high, strangled sound that was almost human in its desperation, followed by the crack of wood and a sharp metallic bang as something connected hard with the fence rail. The men standing at the outside of the pen flinched back as one. 2 of them laughed, the uncomfortable laugh of men pretending they weren't afraid. Emily stepped up to the fence and looked through the rails. The stallion was gray, not pale gray, but the deep, burnished silver of storm clouds an hour before rain, with a black mane that swept across his neck in tangled ropes. He was enormous. 17 hands at least, maybe more, with the kind of bone structure that made you understand immediately why someone had paid good money for him before things went wrong. He was circling the pen the way trapped things circle, not with purpose, but with panic. His hooves churning up the dirt in irregular patterns, his head thrown back, the whites of his eyes showing in full crescents above the dark iris. There was a rope on him, or rather, there had been. The frayed end of a lead line trailed from his halter, dragging in the dirt behind him, the other end presumably still attached to whoever had tried to lead him last, and had let go, or been thrown. A wooden training post in the center of the pen had been knocked sideways. There were fresh marks on 2 of the fence rails where he had kicked them. Deep marks. The kind of marks that said the wood was only holding because it was lucky. One of the men near Emily noticed her standing there. He was older, in his 50s, with a face that had been left out in too much sun for too many years. He glanced at her without much interest, and then glanced back at the pen. "You the woman answering the ad?" he said. "I am," Emily said. "You want to turn yourself back around then. Job's already filled." He said it the way men said things they expected to not be argued with. Flat, final, not unkind, but completely uninterested in a different answer. "I don't see anyone working with him," Emily said. The man looked at her sideways. "Last fella that tried is over at Doc Henley's with 2 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. One before him quit outright. One before that." He paused. "Well, let's just say Hank Peters don't ride anymore." Emily kept her eyes on the horse. "What's his name?" "Storm. And that there name ain't irony, miss. It's a warning." "How long has he been in that pen?" "Since this morning. Nathan's about to make the decision to put him down. Horse has been through 4 trainers in 6 weeks. He ain't trainable. He ain't rideable. He ain't safe." The stallion had stopped circling. He stood now in the far corner of the pen with his sides heaving, his neck low, his breath coming in great shuddering gusts that raised small clouds of dust from the ground in front of his nostrils. He was not calm. Calm was not what this was. This was the stillness of a creature that had exhausted itself fighting and had arrived at a temporary ceasefire with the world. The kind of stillness that would shatter again the moment anyone came close enough to remind him what close felt like. "Who does he belong to?" Emily asked. "Nathan Brooks, ranch owner. That's him over there." She looked where the man indicated. Nathan Brooks stood apart from the other men, his arms resting on the top rail of the fence, his hat pushed back on his head, looking at the horse with an expression Emily recognized from the inside. The expression of someone trying to solve a problem they did not want to admit might be unsolvable. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, somewhere in his late 30s, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of posture that said he had once stood straighter and had stopped bothering sometime in the recent past. He did not look at Emily when she approached. He looked at Storm. "Mr. Brooks," Emily said. He glanced at her then. His eyes were dark, steady, the kind of eyes that processed things quickly and showed very little of what the processing found. "You're here about the ad," he said. It was not a question. "I am. It's been filled." "The man at the fence told me that," Emily said. "He also told me the man who filled it is at the doctor's office." Nathan looked back at the horse. A muscle worked in his jaw. "This horse has hurt 4 men. I'm not putting a woman in that pen." "I'm not asking you to put me anywhere," Emily said. "I'm asking you to let me try." "Miss..." He stopped. Looked at her again, slower this time. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness exactly, but attention, real attention, the kind that cost something. "What's your name?" "Emily Carter, Miss Carter. Storm has broken ribs, dislocated a shoulder, cracked a man's collarbone, and driven another one clear out of the profession entirely. He has 17 hands of violence, and there is not a man on this ranch who will go near that pen anymore for any amount of money. Now I don't know what you know about horses." "He's not violent," Emily said. Nathan went quiet. "He's frightened," she said. "There's a difference." The older man behind her made a sound that was almost a laugh. One of the younger hands said something quietly to the man beside him, and there was a short, suppressed snort of amusement from that direction. Emily did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Nathan Brooks, and she kept her voice level. "A violent horse attacks," she said. "He charges. He pursues. He doesn't stop when the threat is gone. That horse." She gestured toward Storm without pointing, just a slight motion of her chin toward the pen. "Stopped the moment the men stopped coming at him. He's in the corner right now because he wants space, not because he's planning his next move. He's scared. He's been scared for a long time, and every person who's gotten into that pen with him has gotten in wrong." Nathan stared at her for a long moment. "Gotten in wrong how?" "They went in to break him," Emily said. "You can't break a horse that's already broken. You have to give him a reason to believe that not everything is trying to hurt him." The silence stretched. From the pen, Storm shifted his weight, lifted his head slightly, blew out a long, slow breath that rattled somewhere in his chest. Nathan looked at the horse, then at Emily, then at the horse again. "You've done this before," he said. It was not quite a question, and not quite a statement. "My father kept horses on our property in Billings," Emily said, "before the debts. I was the only one who could handle the ones that came in wrong." "Your father. He's not part of this conversation," Emily said calmly. Something moved through Nathan's expression. Quick, unreadable, gone. He pushed off the fence rail and straightened to his full height, and he looked down at her with those dark, assessing eyes for another moment before he said, "All right, what do you need?" "I need everyone to step back from the fence," Emily said, "about 30 yards, and I need the gate." "You need the gate," Nathan repeated. "Yes." "You want to go in?" "Yes." From behind her, the older ranch hand. She would learn later his name was Caleb, and that he had worked for Nathan for 11 years. Said flatly, "Nathan, this is a bad idea." "Probably," Nathan said. He was still looking at Emily. "What else?" "Nothing," Emily said. "Just the gate and the space." He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Caleb, take the men back." There was grumbling. There was the kind of shuffling and muttering that men do when they are following an order they don't agree with but aren't willing to refuse. Emily heard boots on dry ground moving back, and then relative silence, and then Nathan said quietly, just to her, "If he charges, you go down flat. Don't try to run. He'll outrun you every time." "He's not going to charge," Emily said. "Miss Carter." "Mr. Brooks." He held the gate open. Emily set down her carpetbag at his feet without ceremony. She did not look at the men watching from a distance. She did not look at Nathan. She looked at Storm, who had raised his head again at the sound of the gate latch, whose ears were pinned back, whose body had gone rigid with the ready-to-run tension of a creature expecting the worst. She walked in. She walked in slowly, without purpose or destination in her steps. Not toward Storm, not away from him, just into the space of the pen. The way you walk into a room you are not certain is yours yet, but are going to stand in anyway. Her hands were loose at her sides. She kept her chin down and her shoulders soft, the posture of someone who is not a threat, who does not need to be a threat, who has no agenda in this particular moment except to exist in the same space without demanding anything from it. Storm backed up 1 step. 2. His haunches hit the fence rail behind him, and he had nowhere left to go, and his breathing went sharp and rapid, and for 1 long suspended second, Emily thought he was going to break, going to come forward at a run, going to make a liar of everything she had just said to Nathan Brooks in front of his entire crew. She stopped walking. She stood completely still. She turned her body slightly sideways, not facing Storm straight on, which was a challenge, but angled, which was an invitation. Her left hand was loose. She let it fall open, palm up, fingers slightly curved, empty. Just her hand. Just the openness of it. An open hand in a world that had done nothing but close itself into fists around this horse for weeks. Storm's ears flicked. Forward. Just barely. His breathing did not slow exactly, but the sharp edge went out of it. He blew out through his nostrils once. A low, cautious sound. Emily did not move. 30 seconds passed. Maybe more. From beyond the fence, she could not hear a single human sound. No shuffling feet. No whispered comment. Silence. The stunned kind. The kind that only happens when people see something they did not expect and have not yet found words for. Storm took one step forward. Not a charge. Not aggression. Just one step, tentative, his weight shifting forward and then catching, as if he had surprised himself with his own movement. Emily's hand stayed open. Storm took another step, and another, and then he was standing 4 feet in front of her, close enough that she could see the individual dark hairs along the edge of his muzzle, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body, close enough that his breath reached her palm in warm, slow gusts. His head was low, not submissive, not broken, but curious, uncertain in a way that was entirely different from terrified. He was reading her the way horses read things they have not decided about yet, with his whole body, every sense open. Emily did not move her hand toward him. She waited. Storm lowered his head another inch. 2 inches. His muzzle touched the edge of her palm, so lightly it was barely pressure, barely contact, the ghost of a touch, and then stayed there. From beyond the fence, Nathan Brooks made a sound. It was very small and very quiet, and Emily was not sure later whether she had actually heard it or only imagined it. A sharp, caught breath. The sound a man makes when he witnesses something he cannot immediately explain and does not want to break by explaining. Emily did not look at him. She stood with Storm's breath in her palm for another long minute, and then she very slowly closed her fingers, not gripping, not holding, just acknowledging, just saying, in the language that horses understand and people have spent centuries forgetting, "I know you are here. I see you. I am not going to ask you for more than this right now." Storm exhaled. The long, deep, full-body exhale of a creature who has been holding tension in every muscle for so long, it has become the only feeling he knows, and has just, against every expectation, let some of it go. Emily stepped back slowly, turned toward the gate, walked out. Nathan was standing at the gate with his hand still on the latch and an expression on his face that she would spend the next several weeks trying to read and never quite succeed at entirely. It was not the expression she was used to from men, not dismissal, not surprise exactly, not condescension or admiration, or any of the feelings men typically showed her. It was something more complicated than all of those, something that looked a little bit like recognition. Like he had been searching for a word for a long time, and someone had just said it aloud without being asked. He closed the gate behind her. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "How did you know that would work?" "I didn't," Emily said. "But I knew that what everyone else was doing wasn't working, and I figured trying the opposite couldn't make things any worse." He looked at her for another moment. "You need work." "I need room and board," Emily said. "Work I'm happy to provide in exchange. The bunkhouse is for men. I don't need the bunkhouse. There's a room above the stable. I could see it from the road, the window on the east side. I'll take that." He blinked. "That room hasn't been used in years. It needs cleaning." "I'm good at cleaning," Emily said. "Miss Carter." He stopped, looked at the carpet bag at his feet, then at her, then at the pen where Storm had retreated to the center, and stood now with his head up but his body quiet, watchful rather than panicked, present rather than absent. He picked up her carpet bag and held it out to her. "It doesn't pay much." "It pays in not being somewhere I don't choose to be," Emily said, and she took the carpet bag from his hand. "That's more than I've had in a long time." Something shifted in his face again. That quick, unreadable thing. He nodded once, short and final. The nod of a man who has made a decision. He is not entirely sure about and is moving forward with it anyway because standing still has stopped feeling like an option. "Caleb will show you the room," he said. "Supper's at 6. He walked away before she could answer. Emily watched him go. The straight, deliberate walk of a man who kept everything he felt behind him at all times, who had built walls the way other men built barns, practical, sturdy, designed to keep weather out. She recognized that walk too. She had worn that posture herself, in different circumstances, for different reasons. She understood it in a way she had not expected to. Caleb appeared at her elbow, squinting at her the way old men squint at things they are not sure whether to be impressed by or suspicious of. "That was either the bravest thing I ever saw or the dumbest," he said. "Haven't decided which." "Could be both," Emily said. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had gone a little further. "Come on then, Miss Carter. Room's a mess, and supper ain't gonna wait for either of us." She followed him across the yard. As they passed the training pen, Storm stood in the center of it and watched her go. His ears tracked her until she turned the corner of the barn. She did not look back, but she knew, the way you know things that live in the body rather than the mind, that he was watching. That something had shifted between them in those 2 minutes inside the fence. Something small and foundational that could either grow into something real or be destroyed by one wrong step. She had spent 2 years around Richard Holloway, which meant she had spent 2 years perfecting the art of not taking wrong steps. She did not let herself think about Richard right now. There would be time for that later. There was always time for the things you were running from. They had a way of making their own time, arriving without invitation, setting themselves down at your table, and waiting with the patient certainty of people who know you cannot avoid them forever. For now, there was a room above the stable, and supper at 6, and a gray stallion who had touched her open hand with his muzzle, as if testing the theory that the world might contain something that did not mean him harm. For now, that was enough. The room above the stable was, as Nathan had said, a mess. It had not been used as living quarters for years. It was clear from the dust and the stacked saddle equipment and the cobwebs thick in every corner that it had functioned most recently as storage. A single iron-framed bed with no mattress. A crate that served as a table. A washstand with a cracked basin. A window on the east side that looked out over the training pens and, beyond them, across the flat plain toward the mountain line in the distance. Emily set her carpet bag on the crate and looked at the room for a moment. Then she began to clean. She worked without stopping until the supper bell rang, and when she came downstairs, she had cleared enough space to move freely, had found a spare mattress rolled up at the back of the room and wrestled it onto the bed frame, and had opened the east window to let the stale air out and the smell of hay and cooling Montana dusk in. The kitchen was at the back of the main house. She went to the back door rather than the front. The front door of other people's houses was not yet her door, and knocked, and a stout woman in her 40s named May, who turned out to be the cook and housekeeper and the most reliable source of information about everything that happened on the property, opened the door and looked her over with the frank assessment of a woman who has spent years judging character quickly and has gotten very good at it. "You're the horse girl," May said. "I'm Emily Carter," Emily said. May stood aside to let her in. "Sit there. You look like you haven't eaten since Tuesday." The hands ate in the kitchen, 6 of them, including Caleb, plus Emily and May. Nathan did not appear at supper. May set a plate at the head of the table and then removed it without comment when it became clear he wasn't coming. No one mentioned it. Emily noticed that no one seemed surprised either. She ate. The food was good. Beef stew and biscuits and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. She answered the questions the hands asked her. Where she was from. Had she worked with horses before? Had she been to Montana before? Briefly and honestly, giving enough to be civil and not enough to invite the kind of follow-up questions she didn't want to answer. Yes, from Billings. Yes, she'd grown up with horses. No, this was her first time this far west. Nobody asked about family. Ranch hands, she was learning, had a code about that. You didn't ask about the things people might be running from, because most people on ranches in 1887 were running from something, and the running was their own business. Caleb waited until the other men had gone to the bunkhouse and May was washing dishes before he said, low and without preamble, "You should know about Storm, about how he got the way he is." Emily wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Tell me." Nathan bought him 8 months ago from a trader out of Helena. Paid top dollar. Storm had championship bloodlines, fastest quarter-mile time in the territory, the whole story. Trader said he was green but trainable. What he didn't say. Caleb paused, and something crossed his face that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Was that the previous owner had spent 2 years trying to break that horse with methods I wouldn't use on a mule. Whip and spur and starvation. By the time Nathan got him, Storm was so deep inside his own fear that every hand he'd ever seen meant pain. First trainer Nathan hired went in like normal. Storm put him through the fence. Did Nathan know about how Storm had been treated? Found out after. Confronted the traitor. Man had already left the territory. Caleb set his cup down. Nathan don't give up on things easy. That's his nature. But 4 men hurt. That's hard to justify keeping an animal on the property for. He gave himself until the end of this month. After that, he was going to put him down, Emily said. Yep. How many days until the end of the month? Caleb looked at her steadily. 11. Emily nodded. Set her own cup down. I'll need you to tell the other hands to stay clear of the training pen in the mornings. I'll work with Storm from first light until the men start their regular work. Nobody in the pen with us, and nobody crowding the fence. I can do that. He paused. What are you going to do in 11 days? Show Nathan Brooks that Storm is worth keeping, Emily said. And if you can't? She was quiet for a moment. Then I'll have done what I could, she said. And I can live with that. Caleb picked up his hat from the chair beside him and turned it in his hands. The motion of a man gathering himself to say something he isn't sure how to say. Miss Carter, I've been on this ranch since before Nathan's wife passed. I know his moods well as I know the weather signs out here, and sometimes better. Today, when you came out of that pen... He stopped, started again. I ain't seen that look on his face in 3 years. Emily waited. Just figured you should know, Caleb said. He put on his hat and stood up and tipped the brim to her. Good night, Miss Carter. Good night, Caleb. She sat alone in the kitchen for a few minutes after he left, listening to May moving through the house, closing up for the night. Through the window, the Montana sky was fully dark and enormous. More stars than she had ever seen over Billings, where the lights of town softened the edges of the universe. Out here the sky came all the way down to the ground. She thought about Nathan Brooks standing at that fence with his arms folded and his hat pushed back, and that look on his face that she couldn't name. She thought about 11 days. She thought about a horse who had been broken by the wrong hands and had spent months waiting for the world to prove him right, to confirm that his terror was rational, that everything which came toward him intended damage. She understood that particular waiting. She had done it herself for 2 years. Every day waking up inside Richard Holloway's carefully constructed world, his contracts and his expectations, and his voice that was always warm, right until the moment it wasn't. Waking up and spending the day waiting for the thing that would finally make her stop trying to manage her own fear and simply run. She had run. She had done it finally, definitively, on the morning of a wedding she had never agreed to, and burned the evidence of it in the churchyard. But running only worked if you had somewhere to run to. And right now, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she thought she might have found somewhere that could be that. Not safe exactly. Nothing was safe. She had stopped believing in safe, but real. A place that asked something of her, and offered something in return, and didn't require her to be smaller than she was in order to exist within it. She blew out the kitchen lamp and went back across the dark yard to the stable. Storm was quiet in his pen. She could hear him breathing as she passed. The slow, deep breathing of sleep, or near sleep, the rhythm of a body that had finally let its guard down enough to rest. She stopped for a moment and stood at the rail. 11 days, she said quietly. Not to the horse, not to herself exactly, just to the dark Montana air, to the record of the thing she was committing to. We've got 11 days. She went upstairs to her room. She lay down on the rolled mattress with her coat over her for warmth and her notebook on the crate beside her, and she looked at the ceiling for a long time. She had not opened the notebook since she left Billings. Inside it were 2 years of carefully noted conversations. Dates, names, amounts, the kinds of things Richard discussed freely in front of her, because he had never considered, not once, that she might be paying attention. He had told her directly, early in their arrangement, that her opinion of his business was not a factor he needed to account for. He had believed that, absolutely. He had been wrong about it for exactly as long as Emily had needed him to be wrong about it. She would deal with what was in that notebook in its own time. Right now, the notebook was simply a weight she carried, a set of facts she possessed. a power she had not yet decided how to use. Right now, the most urgent fact in her world was a silver horse in a pen. Below her, and 11 days to prove something to a man with dark eyes and walls like barn timber, and a look on his face that Caleb had described as one he hadn't seen in 3 years. She closed her eyes. She slept better than she had in months. The first morning, she was at Storm's pen before the sun was fully over the eastern ridge. She did not go in. She stood at the rail, one boot on the lowest board, her coffee from the kitchen in her hand, and she simply existed near the pen the way she had learned to exist near frightened things. Without agenda, without pressure, without the specific kind of human forward-leaning need that animals read immediately and translate into danger. Storm came to the far side of the pen and watched her. She sipped her coffee, watched the mountains, did not look at the horse directly. He snorted once. She did not react. After 20 minutes of this, she heard boots behind her and knew without turning who it was from the particular weight and rhythm of the step. Deliberate, contained, the walk of a man who has learned to take up exactly the space he intends to take up, and not 1 foot more. Nathan Brooks appeared at the rail beside her. He had a cup of coffee, too. He looked at Storm, and Storm looked at him, and the horse's ears went back slightly. Not the full pinned-back terror of yesterday, but a wariness. A memory of previous encounters that had not ended well. "You're up early," Nathan said. "So are you," Emily said. He was quiet for a moment. "How long are you planning to stand here?" "Until he stops watching me like I'm a threat," Emily said. "Could be an hour, could be 3. I'm not in a hurry." Nathan looked at the horse, looked at Emily. Something in his face did that thing again, the quick, unreadable shift. "The other trainers went straight in," he said. "Every one of them." "I know," Emily said. "He knows too. That's the problem." A pause. "What does he need?" "Time," she said. "Proof. He needs enough evidence that not everything that comes near him is going to hurt him, that he can afford to consider the possibility." She took a sip of her coffee. "Same as anybody." Nathan said nothing for a moment, then, quietly, "How much time do you need?" "More than 11 days, she said honestly. "To do it right? 3 months. Maybe 4. "I can't keep a dangerous animal on the property for 3 months. "You won't be keeping a dangerous animal," Emily said. "You'll be keeping a frightened one. Those aren't the same thing, and the treatment is completely different." He looked at her sidelong. The gray morning light was doing interesting things to his face, softening the edges of the control he kept on his expression, showing something underneath it that she thought might be exhaustion. Long, thorough, accumulated exhaustion. The kind that doesn't come from bad nights, but from years of carrying something heavy without setting it down. "Give me 30 days, she said. "If you don't see real change in 30 days, I'll acknowledge that I was wrong about him, and you can do what you need to do. And if I see real change, then you let me keep working." Nathan looked at Storm for a long moment. The horse had lowered his head slightly, though his eyes were still tracking every movement. His weight had shifted, subtle but real, from the ready-to-bolt posture of full panic to something marginally less catastrophic. 30 days, Nathan said. "Thank you," Emily said. He did not answer. He finished his coffee, turned, and walked back toward the main house. She watched him go, and thought again about those walls he built, practical, sturdy, designed to keep weather out. She thought about what Caleb had said, about a look he hadn't seen in 3 years. She turned back to the pen. Storm had moved 6 inches closer to the rail where she stood. "All right then," she said quietly. Just to him. Just the two of them in the Montana morning, the mountains going pink at the peaks behind them, and the rest of the world still dark and unformed. Let's see what 30 days can do. 30 days. That was what Nathan had given her, and Emily Carter intended to use every hour of every one of them. The second morning, she was at the rail again before sunrise. Third morning, the same. By the 4th day, Storm had begun coming to the fence on his own. Not to her specifically, not yet, but to the general vicinity of where she stood, drawn by something he could not name and had not yet decided to trust. She took that as progress. Small progress, the kind that didn't look like anything from the outside. But she had learned long ago that the things which look like nothing from the outside are very often everything on the inside. She followed a system she had worked out over years of watching her father's horses in Billings, the ones that came to the property already damaged, already convinced that human hands meant pain. First, presence without pressure. Just being near without asking anything. Second, introduction of routine. The same movements, the same times, the same quiet voice, saying the same things, until the sound of her became familiar rather than alarming. Third, and only after the first two were solid, actual contact. Slow. Offered rather than taken. Everything on his terms until he learned that terms were something he was allowed to have. By the end of the first week, Storm would eat from a bucket she set inside the gate without her having to leave the pen for him to approach it. By the end of the second week, he let her stand within arm's reach while he ate. It was not dramatic. There were no moments of sudden revelation, no single morning where everything changed at once. It was the slow accumulation of unremarkable moments adding up to something remarkable, which was, Emily had come to believe, exactly how trust worked, whether you were building it with a horse or a person or yourself. Nathan watched. He did not interfere. He appeared at the fence in the early mornings with his coffee and stood there for varying lengths of time, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes only 5. And he never said much, but he was consistent. She noticed that. The consistency of a man who was paying attention without making a performance of it. What she did not notice, or rather, what she noticed but filed away without examining too closely, was that he had stopped looking at Storm the way he'd looked at him that first day. He had stopped looking at the horse like a problem requiring a solution, and started looking at him the way you look at something that has reminded you of a feeling you thought you had lost permanent access to. She noticed it. She did not let herself think about it yet. On the 9th morning, Nathan leaned on the fence rail beside her and said, "He's different." "He's the same horse," Emily said. "He's just showing you a different part of himself." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "May says you've been up until midnight the last 3 nights working on the saddle inventory." "The inventory was a disaster," Emily said. 3 saddles that needed resoling were in the pile marked serviceable. 2 of the serviceable ones had cracked tree bars that nobody had caught. If one of your hands had taken either of those out under load. She shook her head. "That's not your job," Nathan said. "It is now," Emily said. "You're paying me in room and board. I intend to earn it." He turned to look at her then. A full, direct look, not the sideways glances she'd been getting. "You don't have to earn it past what we agreed." "I know," she said. "I want to." The look he gave her was the complicated one again, the one she couldn't quite read. She had started keeping a private catalog of his expressions, the way she kept notes in the small notebook she hadn't opened since arriving, not writing them down, just storing them, studying them the way you study a language you haven't learned yet but intend to. He turned back to Storm. "Where did you learn all of it? The horses, the saddles, the rest?" "My mother first," Emily said. "She grew up on her father's cattle operation in Wyoming. She knew horses the way most women know their kitchens. Every habit, every mood, every sign. She died when I was 12. She paused. "After that I just kept learning, partly because someone had to, and partly because it was the one place my father couldn't find fault with anything I did." "Your father," Nathan said. The same careful tone he'd used that first day when she had told him her father wasn't part of the conversation. "How was a good man in his better years," Emily said, and she meant it, which made it harder rather than easier. "The debts changed him. Debt changes people. It gets inside the way cold gets inside. You think you're handling it fine, and then one morning you discover you've been making decisions from inside the cold for so long, you can't remember what warm felt like." She kept her eyes on Storm. "He signed papers he shouldn't have signed. He told himself it was a business arrangement. He told me it was the best he could do for me." She stopped. "He believed it. That's the part I keep coming back to. He genuinely believed it." Nathan said nothing. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people standing beside each other, with something real between them that neither one is ready to pick up yet. The way you circle a fire before you sit down next to it. My wife believed things that turned out not to be true, Nathan said. It was quiet, almost offhand, as if he was saying it to the middle distance rather than to her. She believed the cough was nothing, believed it for 8 months. By the time she stopped believing it, he stopped. The ranch has been for sale since the spring of that year. Emily looked at him. He was not looking at her. His jaw was set and his eyes were fixed somewhere past the training pen, past the fence line, past the flat plain and the mountain ridge and everything you could see from where they were standing. "How long ago?" she asked. 3 years, he said. 3 years. The same number Caleb had given her. 3 years of a for sale sign she hadn't noticed on her way in. She had been looking at the horses, at the layout of the buildings, at the work that needed doing. She made a note to look for the sign on her way back across the yard. "You're not selling," she said. Not a question. "No," he said. "I don't know why." He paused. "I couldn't make myself leave. Couldn't make myself stay in a way that felt like staying either." He looked at her then. "I've been somewhere between the two for 3 years." Emily held his gaze. "I know that place," she said. "I lived there for 2 years." Something crossed his face. Recognition. The clean, sharp kind that doesn't need translation. He nodded once, very slightly. Then he pushed off the fence rail and straightened up and the walls came back, not unkindly, just the way they always came back after he let something through them. Automatic, practiced, the reflex of long habit. "I'll have Caleb pull the rest of the tack inventory," he said. "If you're going to do it, might as well do it properly. There's more in the back of the south barn." "All right," Emily said. He walked away. She watched Storm, who had moved slightly closer to the rail while Nathan was speaking, as if the horse had been monitoring the conversation and had drawn his own conclusions from the tone of it. "What do you think?" she said quietly to the horse. Storm flicked one ear toward her, then the other. She took that as a vote in favor of cautious optimism. The days settled into a rhythm. Emily rose before dawn, worked with Storm through the early morning hours, spent the rest of the day on whatever the ranch needed. Saddle repairs, fence line checks, helping May with the supply orders, assisting the hands with foaling season preparations for the mares due in early November. She was useful in the ways that made themselves apparent without being asked, the way capable people are useful, by noticing what needs doing and doing it without waiting for someone to tell them it was their job. The hands came around slowly. Caleb had been first, won over on the initial night. A young man named Tom Briggs was second, 19 years old, earnest as sunrise, who had never worked with a horse as complicated as Storm, and peppered her with questions every time she came within conversational range, until she finally told him to come watch in the mornings if he wanted to learn, and he took her up on it, so immediately that she laughed, which surprised her because she had not laughed at anything in quite a while, and had half forgotten the sensation. A hand named Deke Farrow was harder. He was the oldest of them after Caleb, experienced, deeply conservative in his methods, and he had been the last person to attempt working with Storm before Emily arrived. He had not broken his ribs. That had been the trainer before him. But he had come out of the pen with a bruised shoulder, and what she suspected was a bruised ego that had not yet finished healing. He watched her work with Storm the way a man watches someone do a thing he has done badly, with a combination of resentment and unwilling curiosity that is probably the most honest emotional state a proud person can achieve. On the 14th day, she caught him standing at the fence rail on his own at noon, watching Storm move in the pen. The horse was walking with her now, not on a lead, not with any equipment, just moving beside her the way he would move beside a member of his own herd, at his own pace, with the loose, reaching stride of an animal that has remembered what it feels like to inhabit his own body without bracing against the next strike. Deke Farrow watched this for a long minute. Then, without looking at her, he said, "He'd have been a champion." "He still could be," Emily said. Deke's jaw tightened. "Not after what was done to him." "After what was done to him," Emily said. "He needs someone to prove that what was done to him is not the whole story. That's different from nothing." Deke looked at her then. His face was a map of a man trying to reconsider something he'd already written off and finding the process uncomfortable. "You think he'll take a rider?" "Eventually," Emily said. "Not soon, but eventually." Deke nodded slowly. He looked at Storm again. "I went in hard," he said. It cost him something to say it. She could see that, the careful flatness of the voice people use when they're confessing something they would rather not. "I thought if I was firm enough, quick enough, he'd respect it. That's what I'd always done." "It works with most horses," Emily said. She wasn't giving him an excuse. She was giving him an accurate fact, which was kinder than an excuse. "Storm isn't most horses." "No," Deke said. "He ain't." He pushed off the fence. "Miss Carter." He tipped his hat, the small, economical tip of a man who isn't given to elaborate gestures, but means the ones he makes. He walked away. After that, Deke was not hostile. He was not warm, not immediately, but hostility had been the thing she needed to move, and she had moved it. The rest would come in its own time. It was on the 16th day that Richard Holloway arrived. Emily was inside the pen with Storm when she heard the hoofbeats. Multiple horses coming in hard from the road, the clipped, urgent rhythm of people who are not arriving to visit, but arriving to make a point. Storm heard it too, and stiffened immediately. His head coming up, his ears flattening. 2 weeks of careful work, threatening to unspool in the space of one panicked second. "Easy," Emily said, low and steady, putting her hand to his neck without reaching, just placing it. "Easy, it's not for you." Storm shuddered under her hand, held. She heard voices in the yard, multiple voices, the low, urgent rumble of men who have rehearsed what they are going to say. And over all of them, one voice she recognized immediately, the way you recognize certain sounds without wanting to. Cold water on the back of the neck, a door slamming in an empty house. Richard Holloway's voice. She had last heard it 3.5 weeks ago when she walked away from the church in Billings. She had left his world behind her, and she had been naive enough, or perhaps simply desperate enough, to half believe that the walking away would be the end of it. The plain fact of Richard Holloway's existence made that belief difficult to maintain. She kept her hand on Storm's neck, kept her breathing slow and even. She could hear Nathan's voice now too, quieter than Richard's, the controlled tone of a man who is angry but not showing it, the restraint of someone who has decided not to give the other person the advantage of knowing how much they have rattled him. "Stay here," she said to Storm. The horse shifted his weight, but did not pull away from her hand. She walked out of the pen, closing the gate behind her. Richard Holloway stood in the yard with 2 men she didn't recognize. The hired muscle kind, the kind that stood slightly behind and to each side of an important man, to remind everyone present of exactly how important he considered himself. He was 42, still handsome in the particular way of men who have never suffered real consequences, well dressed in the style of someone who travels into rough country and wants everyone to know he comes from somewhere else. He saw her the moment she came around the corner of the pen, and nothing in his face changed. Not surprise, not relief, not anger. Just the cool, assessing look of a man who has located a thing he considers his, and is now calculating the most efficient way to retrieve it. Nathan stood 3 feet in front of him, hat on, arms loose at his sides, the posture of a man who is drawing a line with his body instead of words. "Emily," Richard said, as if she had simply stepped away briefly, as if the entire world had not changed in the interval. "Mr. Holloway," Emily said, "you've led me quite a chase." The tone was the warm one, the tone he used in public and in business meetings and in front of other men whose respect he wanted. The tone that made people say later what a reasonable man he was. "I understand it. Nerves before a wedding. It's more common than you'd think. But we have an arrangement to honor. Your father and I—" "My father signed a paper," Emily said. "I didn't." The warmth stayed in his voice, but something behind it went sharp. "The paper is a legally binding contract under Montana territorial law. Your father was party to a debt agreement that included—" "I know what it included," Emily said. "I watched him sign it." Richard smiled. He was good at smiling. "Then you understand that your presence here is a violation of the terms." Miss Carter is employed here. Nathan's voice cut across Richard's smoothly, not loud, not aggressive, just final. She's under contract to this ranch. Richard's eyes moved to Nathan with the specific displeasure of a man who has not expected an obstacle and is revising his approach. And you are? Nathan Brooks. This is my property. You're standing on it without an invitation. I'm standing on it with a legal document, Richard said, and one of the men beside him produced a folded paper, holding it out with the practiced timing of someone who has done this before. Miss Carter's father entered into a debt settlement agreement that names her as collateral against... I am not collateral, Emily said. Her voice was level. She had rehearsed this, not this exact conversation, but the shape of it, the emotional architecture of standing in front of Richard's smooth, reasonable voice and not flinching. She had rehearsed it in her head for 2 years, and now she stood in it and discovered that it was exactly as difficult as she had expected, and she was going to get through it anyway. I am a person. I did not sign that agreement. I was not present when it was made. Whatever my father owed you, what your father owed me is not yet satisfied, Richard said, still warm, still reasonable. I'm not a cruel man, Emily. Come back now, willingly, and we'll say nothing more about the circumstances of your departure. We can still make this work. Mr. Holloway. Nathan had not moved. He still stood in the same position, the same arms at his sides, the same unhurried, deliberate presence. I'm going to say this once. Emily Carter works for me. She has a contract with this ranch. Whatever agreement you have with her father, it doesn't transfer ownership of a living woman, and any lawyer in this territory or the next one will tell you the same thing. You are welcome to test that in court. Until a court tells me different, she stays. The warmth drained out of Richard's face. Not into anger. Richard did not do anger in public, he did calculation in public. But into a cool, focused attention that was somehow worse than anger. He looked at Nathan for a long moment, the way he looked at business problems, assembling information, estimating leverage. You have significant debt with the Autumn Ridge Bank, Richard said pleasantly. I noticed that, looking into the local businesses before I came out here. A man in your position can't afford additional complications. Most men in my position can't, Nathan said. You'd be surprised. I'd hate to see a fine property like this encumbered further, Richard said. He picked up his hat and settled it on his head with the slow deliberateness of a man making a performance of being unhurried. I'll pursue the legal avenues. In the meantime... His eyes moved to Emily, and she made herself hold them, made herself not step back. You know where to find me when you're ready to be sensible. He turned and walked toward his horses with his 2 men falling in behind him. He mounted cleanly, turned in the yard, and rode out the same way he came in, unhurried, deliberate, not looking back. The yard was very quiet. Tom Briggs had appeared somewhere during the conversation. Emily could see him at the corner of the barn. Caleb was on the bunkhouse porch. Deke Farrow was standing at the corner of the main fence with his arms crossed and an expression on his face, like a man who has just found something in his barn that doesn't belong there. Nathan turned to look at Emily. Who is he? He said. Richard Holloway, Emily said. Railroad investor. He has significant financial interests in 6 Montana counties and a relationship with at least 3 territorial judges. She kept her voice steady. He means what he says about the legal avenues. He will go to court. He will find a judge he has business with, and he will find a legal argument, and he will come back with something more official than that paper. Nathan was looking at her the way he looked at complicated things. The direct, steady look of assessment, of a man deciding what he is willing to stake and on what. Tell me about the contract, he said. She told him. All of it. Her father's debts, the years of escalating financial desperation, the paper Richard had had her father sign in an office in Billings on a Tuesday afternoon in August 2 years ago, while Emily was in the next room pretending to read and actually memorizing every word that came through the wall. The terms of it. The fiction of consent that Richard had constructed around it. The 2 years she had spent inside his orbit. Not under his roof, not yet. The wedding had been meant to accomplish that, navigating the careful, suffocating world of his expectations. She told Nathan most of it. Not all of it. The notebook she kept against her ribs, the dates and names and amounts, she did not mention yet. Not because she didn't trust him. Because the notebook was a particular kind of weapon, and she had not yet determined whether she needed it or how to use it, and weapons should not be disclosed until you know where you are aiming. Nathan listened without interrupting. When she finished, the silence lasted a beat. 2. Then he said, "You've been carrying this since you got here." "I carry it wherever I go," Emily said. "I've gotten fairly good at it." "You don't have to," he said. And then, as if he had heard himself and was surprised by what he'd said, he turned slightly away, looking toward the gate where Richard's dust was still settling. "I mean, we'll handle this properly. I'll send for Judge Carmichael in Helena. He's a good man. He'll know whether the contract holds." "It won't hold," Emily said. "In a fair reading it can't hold. But Richard doesn't rely on fair readings." "No," Nathan said. "Men like that rarely do." He was quiet for a moment. He mentioned the bank debt. "I heard." "He's not wrong that it exists." He said it without apparent emotion, which she had come to recognize as the way he delivered information that was costing him something. "The ranch has been leveraged since—" He stopped, started again. "Since my wife's illness, the medical expenses, and after—" A pause. "I wasn't making good decisions for a while." Emily looked at him. He was not looking at her. "Nathan." He glanced over. "Thank you," she said, "for not turning me over when he asked." "He didn't ask," Nathan said. "He stated an expectation. There's a difference." A beat. "I don't respond well to expectations stated as facts." Something loosened in Emily's chest. A small, tight knot that had been there since she heard the hoofbeats, maybe longer. "Neither do I," she said. He almost smiled. It was the most fractional thing she had ever seen. The very beginning of a smile, caught before it fully arrived, like a word started and then reconsidered. But it had started. That was real. "I'll send the wire to Judge Carmichael today," Nathan said. He turned toward the main house, then stopped, turned back. "Miss Carter." "Yes?" "The room above the stable," he said. "May has a spare bolt for the inside of that door. I'll have her give it to you tonight." He walked away. Emily stood in the yard for a moment after he was gone. She looked at the training pen, where Storm had come to the fence rail on his own, and was watching her with calm, interested eyes. She walked to him, put her hand out. He pushed his muzzle against her palm immediately. No hesitation now, just the warm, direct pressure of an animal who has made a decision about a person and has stopped questioning it. "I know," she said quietly. "Me too." Caleb appeared beside her. He had the look of a man processing several things simultaneously and not finding it comfortable. "Richard Holloway," he said. "I know that name." "Most people in Montana do," Emily said. "He's got the territorial governor's ear," Caleb said. "Has for years. And Judge Benton in Billings. They've been in the same business ventures since 1883. He paused. "Judge Carmichael in Helena is a fair man, like Nathan said. But Carmichael ain't the only judge with jurisdiction over a contract dispute in this county." "I know," Emily said. "So what are you going to do?" Emily looked at Storm. The horse held her gaze steadily. Not afraid, not braced, just present, just there. "The same thing I've been doing," she said, "one day at a time, and I'm going to be ready when he comes back." "He will come back," Caleb said. "Yes," Emily said. "He will." She spent that evening sitting on the crate in her room with the notebook open on her knees. She had not opened it since Billings. The pages were dense with her small, precise handwriting. Dates running down the left margin, names and figures, and the kind of conversational fragments that sound like nothing until you understand what they refer to. She read through it slowly, making connections she had stored in her memory but not yet assembled on the page. The railroad contracts. The land purchases made through intermediaries. The conversations between Richard and Judge Benton that she had heard through walls and across dinner tables and in the margins of public events, while Richard moved through his world with the absolute confidence of a man who had never seriously considered that the people around him were paying attention. She cataloged it. She organized it. She held the shape of it in her mind, and she understood for the first time with full clarity exactly what it was she was holding. It was not just her own freedom. It was the kind of information that could dismantle a man. The question was whether she would ever need to use it. Whether Richard Holloway would back down when confronted with a legal challenge. Whether a fair judge and a valid argument would be enough. Whether the world would be reasonable about this, or whether the world would be the way it so often was, arranged in favor of whoever had the most money and the most friends in the right rooms. She already knew the answer to that, if she was being honest. She had known it from the moment she heard his voice in the yard. Richard Holloway did not back down. He escalated. He had been escalating in one direction or another her entire life. Calm surface, more pressure underneath, until the surface was doing all the work of containing what was building below it. She had been the surface for 2 years. She was not going to be the surface anymore. She closed the notebook, put it back flat against her ribs where it lived, tucked inside the inner pocket of her coat that she wore even in the room, because habits formed in places where safety isn't guaranteed tend to persist past the moment they are strictly necessary. Someone knocked at the door. 3 knocks. May's knock, she had learned, purposeful and unhurried. Emily opened it. May stood in the doorway with a bolt mechanism in one hand and a small box of tools in the other, and an expression that said she had opinions about the afternoon's events, but was going to install the bolt before she shared them. Nathan said, May said. He did, Emily said, and stepped back to let her in. May installed the bolt in 12 minutes with the efficiency of a woman who has been doing practical things all her life and has no patience for the parts of tasks that can be eliminated. When she was done, she tested it twice, declared it acceptable, and then turned to Emily with her hands on her hips and said, "Richard Holloway." "Yes," Emily said. "I knew a woman in Butte whose husband sold their daughter to a man like that," May said. It was not a judgment of Emily's father, or rather, it was a judgment that had already been delivered internally and filed away, and what May was offering now was something else. Solidarity of the specific, private kind that women have always extended to one another across the specific, private disasters men arrange. She got out eventually. Took 3 years and help from people she hadn't expected. Did she stay out? Emily asked. She did, May said. It wasn't easy, but she did. She picked up her toolbox. You need anything? You knock on the kitchen door. Any hour. Thank you, May, Emily said. May nodded and left. Emily closed the new bolt behind her. She sat back down on the crate and thought about what Caleb had said. About Richard coming back. About the judges and the political connections and the machinery that men like Richard built around themselves. Not out of malice exactly, though malice was certainly present, but out of the deep, constitutional conviction that the world was theirs to arrange, and that any arrangement that inconvenienced them was a malfunction requiring correction. She thought about Nathan standing 3 feet in front of Richard with his arms loose and his voice flat and certain. She thought about the way he had said it. I don't respond well to expectations stated as facts. She had spent 2 years waiting for someone to say that. For someone to stand between her and Richard's smooth, warm, implacable certainty and simply refuse. Not because they were a hero, not because they had a plan or a legal argument or a political connection. Just because they had decided that the expectation was wrong, and they were not going to honor it. She had spent 2 years waiting, and she had finally had enough of waiting and gone out to find it herself. And she had walked into a ranch in Autumn Ridge, Montana, with 43 cents and a name on a piece of paper and a 2-year-old notebook pressed against her ribs. Outside, the wind had picked up. The cold, insistent Montana wind that came down off the mountains in the evenings, and reminded you of the scale of the country and the smallness of any particular human problem within it. She could hear Storm moving in the pen below, the soft, unhurried sound of a horse that has started to believe, incrementally and still provisionally, that tonight the fence will hold, and the hands that come near will not be followed by pain. She did not feel small. She felt exactly her own size, which was larger than she had been permitted to feel for a very long time. She lay down and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would keep working with Storm. She would work through the intermediate steps she had planned, introducing the lead rope again, slow and gentle, letting him investigate it before she attached it. She would make progress visible enough that Nathan could see it. She would do her work on the ranch, and she would do it well, and she would be ready for whatever Richard Holloway brought back with him when he came. And he would come back. She knew that with the certainty of someone who has spent 2 years studying a particular kind of man from the inside. The question was not whether he was coming. The question was whether she would be standing on her own ground when he arrived. For the first time in longer than she could clearly say, Emily Carter fell asleep, certain that she would be. Richard Holloway came back on a Thursday. He came back with a sheriff's deputy, a territorial marshal Emily had never seen before, and a document with a raised seal that caught the morning light when the deputy unfolded it in the yard. He also came back with 3 additional men on horseback who stayed at the gate and did not dismount, which was the kind of detail that told you everything about a man's intentions before he opened his mouth. You don't bring 5 men to a conversation. You bring 5 men to a demonstration. Emily was inside the barn when she heard them arrive. She had Storm on a lead rope for only the 3rd time. The first 2 attempts had ended in 20 minutes each, when his anxiety climbed past the point where pushing further would have undone more than it built. This morning, he had been walking beside her on the lead, with the loose, cooperative rhythm of a horse who has decided the rope is not a threat, and she had been thinking that today might be the day she could introduce the saddle blanket. Just the blanket, just the weight and smell of it laid across his back, while she kept her hand on his neck and her voice going. She heard the hoofbeats, and Storm felt the change in her before she had consciously registered it herself, the barely perceptible shift in her breathing, the infinitesimal tension in the hand holding the lead. And his head came up immediately, and his nostrils went wide, reading the air. "It's all right," she said, though she was not certain it was. "Stand." He stood. She kept her hand on him and listened. Nathan's voice first, from the yard. Then a voice she didn't recognize reading something aloud in the flat, procedural tone of official documents. And then Richard's voice, the warm public voice, the one that made everything sound like a reasonable conversation between reasonable people. And then Nathan again, harder this time, stripped of the careful neutrality he usually maintained. "That document was issued by Judge Benton," Nathan said. "Judge Benton has no jurisdiction over a contract dispute in this county." "The contract was signed in Billings," the marshal said. "That's Judge Benton's district. The woman in question currently resides and is employed in Autumn Ridge. Jurisdiction follows residency." "Territorial law is less clear on that point than you seem to believe, Mr. Brooks." Emily handed Storm's lead rope to Tom Briggs, who had appeared at her elbow with the wide eyes of a 19-year-old encountering his first genuine legal standoff. "Hold him," she said. "Keep your voice steady and your movements slow, and he'll be fine." She walked out of the barn. Richard saw her immediately. He was good at seeing her immediately. He had always had that quality, a kind of tracking instinct, the specific alertness of a man who monitors the location of things he considers his. "Emily," he said. Same tone as last time, same warmth, same fiction of normalcy. "Mr. Holloway," she said. The marshal turned to look at her. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with the permanently skeptical expression of someone who has seen too much of how people behave under legal pressure to be surprised by any of it. "Miss Emily Carter?" he said. "Yes. I have a warrant here issued by Judge Benton of the Billings District requiring your return to Billings to appear before the court in relation to a contract enforcement hearing." He held out the document. "You're not under arrest. This is a civil matter, but you are required to appear." Emily took the document. She read it. She read it carefully, the way she had read everything Richard ever put in front of her. Not for what it said, but for the space between what it said and what it meant. The document was real. The seal was genuine. The language was correct. Judge Benton's signature was at the bottom, and she recognized that signature from 2 years of watching Richard conduct his business affairs with the comfortable thoroughness of a man who maintains his relationships with judges the way other men maintain their tools, regularly, carefully, against future need. She folded the document and held it at her side. "When?" she said. "Monday, the marshal said. You'll be transported to Billings Monday morning. Hearing is set for Wednesday. She'll need legal representation, Nathan said. He was standing beside Emily now. She hadn't heard him move, but there he was, and his presence beside her was the specific kind that a person feels in their physical body, rather than just observing. Solid, deliberate, the standing beside of someone who has decided rather than drifted. She's welcome to arrange that, the marshal said. She'll have it, Nathan said. Richard smiled. I'm not trying to make this adversarial, he said. He was speaking to Nathan but looking at Emily, and the looking was the kind she had spent 2 years learning to translate. It said, I have already calculated the outcome, and I am giving you the grace of the fiction that there is still a choice to be made. This is a legal matter. The court will hear it, and the court will rule. I have confidence in the process. I'm sure you do, Nathan said. He did not raise his voice. He did not take a step forward. He simply stood there with the flat, certain steadiness of a man who has made a decision and is done discussing it. You have your answer. We'll see you in court. Richard held Nathan's gaze for a count of 3. Then he turned, mounted, and rode out of the yard with his men behind him. The deputy and the marshal followed, less dramatically, with the slightly apologetic manner of men who are doing their jobs, and would prefer the jobs were less unpleasant. The yard was quiet again. Emily looked at the document in her hand. Then she looked at Nathan. Benton, she said. I know, Nathan said. He and Richard have been in 3 joint railroad ventures since 1882, Emily said. I know the dates and the amounts. Nathan went very still. How do you know that? She had been carrying the notebook for 23 days. She had carried it for 2 years before that. She had been waiting, without fully articulating the wait to herself, for the right moment, the right person, the right circumstance in which revealing it would be the most effective and least dangerous option rather than a desperation move that could backfire. She looked at Nathan Brooks standing in his yard with his jaw set and his eyes steady, and the posture of a man who had just publicly committed to standing beside her in a courtroom in Billings, and she decided that this was the moment and this was the person. She reached inside her coat and took out the notebook. I was in that house for 2 years, she said. He never considered that I was paying attention. Nathan took the notebook. He opened it. He read for 2 minutes in silence, and his face did not change expression in any dramatic way. But she watched his eyes move, and she watched the quality of his attention shift, the way it shifts when a person moves from reading words to understanding what the words mean, and she knew he was seeing it. He looked up. This is... Yes, she said. Emily. He stopped, said her given name the same way he said important things, without emphasis, without drama, just accurate. Do you understand what you're holding? I've had 2 years to understand it, she said. I held off using it because I didn't know who to trust with it, and because I wasn't certain which was more useful, the threat of revealing it or the actual revelation. A revealed weapon is a spent weapon. An unrevealed one is leverage. She paused. But we're past leverage. He came back with a marshal and a judge's signature. We need the weapon now. Nathan was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the notebook, the way you look at something that has changed the shape of a problem you were just starting to think you understood. I need to wire someone, he said. Not Carmichael. Who? A man named Whitfield, federal attorney out of Helena. He was building a case against railroad land fraud in 3 counties 2 years ago. The case went quiet. I assumed it had come to nothing. He looked at her. It may have come to nothing because the people he needed to make the case had either disappeared or decided not to talk. Emily held his gaze. Or because the documentation he needed wasn't available. Yes, Nathan said. Or that. She took the notebook back from him and held it for a moment. The weight of it was the same weight it had always been. Not heavy exactly, but present. Real in the way that things are real when they matter. Wire Whitfield, she said. Tell him what you know. Don't tell him about the notebook yet. Find out first whether his case is still live and whether he's a man worth trusting with it. Nathan looked at her with the expression that she had stopped trying to name and had started simply filing. The recognition look, the one that appeared when she said something that met him where he was. You've thought about this, he said. I've been thinking about it since Tuesday in August of 1885, when I sat in a room next door to that signing and understood that the only power I was ever going to have in that situation was the power of knowing something the other party didn't know I knew. She said it without heat, without self-pity, with the clean factual delivery of someone who has processed something thoroughly and arrived at the other side of the processing. I've had a long time to think. He nodded. He kept the flat, decisive nod that she had come to understand was how he registered something important without making a production of it. I'll go to the telegraph office this afternoon. I'll go with you, Emily said. He looked at her. She looked back. I'd rather know what you're sending, she said. And I'd rather be seen in town going about my life normally instead of hiding on the property. If Richard's people are watching the ranch, and they are, me disappearing from visible life looks like fear. I'm not afraid. She was, actually, afraid. But she had learned long ago that there is a workable distance between feeling afraid and behaving afraid, and that the distance can be maintained by deciding very specifically what you will and will not let the fear dictate. All right, Nathan said. They rode into Autumn Ridge together that afternoon on two of the ranch horses. Nathan on the dark bay he used for ranch work. Emily on a young chestnut mare named Pearl, who was steady-tempered and suited to a rider who had been spending most of her recent time on foot rather than in a saddle. The town noticed. The town always noticed, in the way small towns notice everything, cataloging and filing and adding to the running collective account of everyone's business that served as the social infrastructure of a community in which there was not much else to do with the long hours. She felt the eyes on the street the same way she'd felt them her first day. But they were different now. Less the curious inspection of a stranger, and more the measuring look of people who had heard something and were trying to reconcile the something with the person in front of them. Word traveled fast in Autumn Ridge. Richard Holloway's arrival with a marshal and a legal document had traveled faster than most things. The telegraph office was run by a man named Silas Webb, who was small and precise, and who had been operating the wire in Autumn Ridge for 9 years, and in that time had sent and received messages that covered the full range of human experience from birth announcements to death notices to business transactions to declarations of various kinds that he had learned to process without expression and without memory. He greeted Nathan by name and Emily by a brief, neutral nod that told her he had opinions and had decided to keep them where they lived. Nathan composed the wire to Whitfield carefully, with Emily reading over his shoulder and making 2 small adjustments to the wording that changed the tone from cautious inquiry to specific invitation. They sent it and paid for a reply to be held at the office. They were on the street outside when Margaret Hollis spoke to them. Margaret Hollis was 63 years old, the widow of the town's previous mayor, and occupied the social position in Autumn Ridge that wealthy, principled older women occupy in small towns everywhere. She was the person whose opinion, once formed, tended to solidify other people's opinions the way cold weather solidifies loose ground. She had been coming out of the dry goods store as they came out of the telegraph office, and she stopped directly in front of them, which required either acknowledgement or a deliberate rudeness that neither of them was prepared to commit. "Mr. Brooks," she said, and then, after a beat that was not quite a pause, but was too deliberate to be anything else, "Miss Carter." "Mrs. Hollis," they both said, in the near unison of people who have not rehearsed but happen to be operating on the same instinct. Margaret Hollis looked at Emily with the directness of a woman who has stopped softening her looking because life has taught her that softened looking is a waste of everyone's time. "I heard about the document," she said. "Benton's signature." "Yes, ma'am," Emily said. "Benton signed a land transfer for Richard Holloway in 1884 that 3 of the original property owners have been trying to contest since 1885, Margaret said. "My late husband was involved in the initial inquiry. It went nowhere because the relevant witnesses could not be located." Her eyes did not leave Emily's, or chose not to come forward. Emily held her gaze. "Some witnesses didn't know who to bring their information to," she said carefully, "or whether the information they had would be received by someone willing to use it." Margaret studied her for another moment. Something moved through her expression. Recognition, the same flavor of recognition she kept encountering in different people, the recognition of one person, seeing in another person something they know from the inside. "There is a county commissioner's hearing scheduled for the 3rd week of October," Margaret said. "Regarding railroad land use rights along the northern quarter, I have been asked to provide testimony. I expect several other property owners will also be present." A pause. "People in that room would be very interested in corroborating information, if any existed." "I understand," Emily said. "I expect a great many things will become clearer between now and October," Margaret said. She looked at Nathan. "Mr. Brooks, your late wife was a woman of exceptional character. I've always thought you honor her memory by keeping that ranch running." She nodded to them both and continued down the street at the measured pace of a woman who moves through the world on her own schedule. Nathan watched her go. "She knows something," he said. "She knows a great deal," Emily said. "And she just told us she's willing to be at the same table when it matters." She turned back toward the horses. "The 3rd week of October." "That's 5 weeks," Nathan said. "It's enough time." She untied Pearl from the rail and gathered the reins. "If Whitfield responds and his case is still live, the notebook goes to him before the hearing. If the hearing goes as Margaret Hollis is suggesting it might—" She stopped. Richard expected a frightened woman and a cash-poor rancher with no political allies. He didn't expect any of this. "No," Nathan said. He was quiet for a moment, watching her with the steady, complicated look that she had learned to read one layer at a time. "He made the mistake of underestimating you." "Men like Richard always do," Emily said. "It's the most useful quality they have." They rode back to the ranch in the early evening, and for long stretches of the ride, they didn't talk. The silence between them was a particular kind, not empty, not uncomfortable, but inhabited. The kind of silence that two people share when they have said enough important things for one day and have agreed without discussing it to let the important things settle. She was aware of him riding beside her, the way you become aware of certain things gradually, not as a sudden fact, but as an accumulating weight, a presence that you register in the body before the mind has finished forming the thought. She had been aware of it for some time. She had been, with some deliberateness, not examining it too closely, the way you don't look directly at something that might not survive being looked at directly. She thought about what Caleb had said, about the look on Nathan's face that he hadn't seen in 3 years. She thought about a man standing at a fence with his arms loose and his voice flat and certain, saying, "I don't respond well to expectations stated as facts." She thought about the bolt on the inside of her door, which she had installed because he asked May to give it to her, which was not the action of a man who viewed her as an asset or a problem or a piece of business to be resolved. It was the action of a man who understood that a woman's safety in her own room was something she should have control of, and who had thought of it before she had asked. She did not let herself follow that thought further. Not yet. There was too much else in motion, too many things requiring clear thought and careful management, and she had learned that the clearest thinking happened when you were not simultaneously trying to navigate something you did not yet have words for. Whitfield's reply arrived 2 days later, carried out to the ranch by Silas Webb's boy, who appeared at the gate looking important with the folded paper in his hand and the self-conscious pride of someone entrusted with something significant. Nathan read it first. His face did not change. He handed it to Emily. The reply was brief. Federal Attorney Daniel Whitfield, Helena Office, confirmed that the investigation into railroad land fraud in 3 Montana counties had not been closed. It had been suspended pending additional evidence. He was very interested in new information. He would be in Autumn Ridge within 4 days. Emily read it twice. Then she folded it and held it for a moment. 4 days, she said. Yes, Nathan said. She put the paper in her coat pocket, next to the notebook. 2 pieces of paper that together represented something she had been building toward for 2 years, without knowing exactly what she was building toward. The shape of it was becoming clearer now. Not a plan exactly, not yet, but the architecture of one. The bones of something that could hold weight. Whitfield arrived on a Wednesday evening, riding in from the Helena Road on a gray horse that looked like it had covered a significant distance without complaint. He was younger than Emily had expected, mid-30s, with an angular face and careful eyes, and the kind of precise, deliberate manner that said he had trained himself out of imprecision, because imprecision in his work had consequences. He shook Nathan's hand with the brief formality of a man who knows how to skip pleasantries without being rude. He shook Emily's hand too, which she noticed. Not every man in 1887 Montana extended that courtesy. They sat in Nathan's kitchen. Nathan, Emily, Whitfield, and Caleb, who had been included because Nathan trusted him, and because he had been on the ranch when the original Holloway confrontation had happened, and knew the sequence of events without needing to be caught up. Whitfield listened. He had a quality she recognized from Margaret Hollis, the quality of someone who listens for substance rather than opportunity, who is interested in what you are actually saying rather than what it means for his own position. She had encountered that quality rarely enough in her life to notice it immediately when it was present. When she finished laying out the broad structure of what she had, he was quiet for a full 30 seconds. Then he said, "The notebook." "Yes," Emily said. "Can I see it?" She had thought about this carefully. She had thought about it since the moment she decided to tell Nathan it existed. She held Whitfield's gaze and made the final decision in real time, the way final decisions usually actually happen. Not in advance with perfect information, but in the moment with whatever information you have and the best judgment you can bring to bear on it. She reached inside her coat and put the notebook on the table. Whitfield opened it. He read. He read for a long time, longer than Nathan had, more methodically, going back twice to specific pages, making small notations on a pad of paper he had produced from his coat pocket. When he finished, he closed the notebook and set it on the table and looked at Emily over it. "Miss Carter," he said, "do you understand that testifying to the contents of this notebook in a public hearing will require you to be present and identified as the source of the information?" "Yes," she said. "And that Richard Holloway will have resources available to challenge your credibility and your account?" "I'm aware," she said. "And you're prepared to do it anyway." It was not a question. It was the kind of statement that is checking for certainty rather than soliciting information. She met his eyes steadily. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "I have been preparing to do it for 2 years. I was waiting for the moment when doing it would actually accomplish something, rather than simply being brave in a direction that led nowhere." She paused. "This is that moment." Whitfield looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded, slow, definitive, the nod of a man closing a decision. "We have 5 weeks before the county commissioner's hearing." He picked up the notebook and then set it back on the table, a deliberate gesture. He was not taking it. He was returning it to her keeping. "I'll need to review the full contents with you. I'll need to cross-reference the dates and names with the land record documentation I have in Helena. And I need to know whether there are any other witnesses, people who were present at any of these conversations or transactions." "Margaret Hollis may be one," Emily said. "Indirectly. And there may be property owners involved in the land transfers who were never paid the agreed amounts and would be willing to say so if given a safe way to do it." "I'll need names," Whitfield said. "I have some," Emily said. "Not all, but a starting point," Whitfield wrote. He was quiet for a moment, and then he looked at Emily, and then at Nathan, and then at his notepad. "I want to be clear about the risk here," he said. "Holloway has resources and allies, and he will use both. Once this process begins formally, there is no quiet resolution. It will be public, it will be adversarial, and the period between beginning and conclusion will be," he chose his word carefully, "uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable for whom?" Nathan said. "For anyone associated with bringing the case," Whitfield said. He looked at Nathan directly. "Including you, Mr. Brooks. You've already been identified as someone who has refused to comply with his demands. He'll move on the bank debt." "Let him," Nathan said. It was quiet, the way his certain things always were. "You may lose the ranch," Whitfield said. Not unkindly, accurately. Nathan was silent for a moment. Emily watched his face and saw something move through it. Not the quick, unreadable flicker she had catalogued before, but something slower and more exposed. The expression of a man looking at something he has been holding at a distance and finally letting it be close. He looked at Emily, briefly, one glance, and she understood what the glance said. Understood it clearly and completely, in the way you understand some things without translation. And then he looked back at Whitfield. "I've had the property listed for sale for 3 years," Nathan said. "I haven't been able to make myself leave. I think I've been waiting for a reason to stay instead." A pause. "Turns out a reason is harder to find than a reason to go. But I've found it." He picked up his coffee cup. "Move on the bank debt. We'll deal with it." Whitfield looked between them, made a note. "All right," he said. "Then we have 5 weeks and a great deal of work." After Whitfield had been shown to the bunkhouse for the night, Emily sat in the kitchen with Nathan and May's leftover coffee going cold between them. The night sounds came in through the open window. Horses, wind, the particular Montana quiet that is not actually quiet, but is full of small sounds that have become familiar enough to feel like silence. "He's going to go after the ranch," Emily said. "Yes," Nathan said. "Before the hearing. He'll move to accelerate the bank debt the moment Whitfield files anything official." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "He's done it before. It's in the notebook. 2 property owners in the Billings district who tried to contest land transfers. He called the debt within 30 days of the first legal filing. Both of them withdrew." "I'm not going to withdraw," Nathan said. "I know," Emily said. "But you need to understand what it might cost you." He looked at her. The kitchen was quiet, and the lamplight was low, and his face in that light was stripped of the careful containment he usually maintained. Not because he had let it go on purpose, but because there are hours of the night when maintenance becomes too much work, and what's underneath simply surfaces. "Emily." He said her name the way he said the things that cost him something. "I know what it might cost. I'm telling you I don't care." "You might care when it's the ranch and not just the idea of the ranch," she said. "My wife built this kitchen," he said. It came out quietly, not as sentiment, but as statement. The kind of private true thing that a person says when they have decided to trust someone with it. "She designed the whole house, spent 3 months drawing plans before we broke ground. She wanted the east windows to catch the morning light because she said morning was the best part of any day, and she didn't want to miss any of it." He looked at his coffee cup. "I've been in between staying and leaving for 3 years because leaving felt like abandoning her and staying felt like—" He stopped. "Staying felt like grief that never moved forward." Emily waited. "It's moved forward," he said. He did not look at her when he said it. He looked at the east wall of the kitchen, where the windows his wife had designed would let in the morning light. Something in the last few weeks. It moved. The thing she had been not looking at directly was looking at her now. She let herself look back. "Nathan," she said. He met her eyes. "We're going to win this," she said. "And you're going to keep the ranch. And your wife built a good kitchen, and I intend to keep drinking coffee in it for as long as you'll have me." His face did the thing, the fractional beginning of a smile, caught before it fully arrived. This time it went slightly further than before. Not quite all the way, but further. "You know that's the most personal thing you've said to me in 23 days, he said. "I was waiting until I meant it completely," Emily said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "Stay." One word. Not a question. Not a command. The same word he might have said to Storm. Not pulling, not pushing, just opening a door and leaving it open. "I already told you," she said. "I'm here because I chose to be." Outside, Storm moved in his pen, the quiet, sure-footed movement of a horse that no longer braces against the night. The lamp burned low between them, and neither of them moved to turn it up, and the east windows waited for the morning that was still several hours away, and everything that had been set in motion. The wire to Whitfield, the notebook on the table, the look on Richard Holloway's face when he understood for the first time that the calculation he had made was wrong. All of it was gathered there in that kitchen, quiet and real, and pointed toward a reckoning that was 5 weeks away. Neither of them was afraid of it. That, Emily thought, was the most remarkable thing. After everything, after 2 years of managing her fear with the precision of someone who cannot afford to let it show, she was sitting in a kitchen in Autumn Ridge, Montana, with a man who had said stay and meant it as an open door, and she was not afraid. The fear was still there. It would be there until Richard Holloway was no longer able to be what he had been. But it was not in charge of her. It had not been in charge of her since the morning she burned the wedding dress in the churchyard and walked away and kept walking until she found something worth walking toward. She had found it. The bank letter arrived on a Friday morning, 9 days after Whitfield filed his preliminary documentation with the federal court in Helena. May brought it in from the gate rider with the particular careful quietness of a woman who has read the return address and understands what it means. She set it on the kitchen table in front of Nathan without comment, which was itself a comment. May had an opinion about everything and expressed silence only when the thing in front of her had moved past the range of opinions into the range of facts that simply needed to be faced. Nathan read it once, set it down, picked it up, and read it again. Emily watched him from across the table where she was going through the list of names Whitfield had asked her to compile. Property owners, former employees of Holloway's railroad venture, anyone whose name appeared in the notebook in connection with a transaction that had not gone the way the official record said it had. 60 days, Nathan said. She had known this was coming. Knowing had not made it smaller. Full acceleration? Full acceleration. He set the letter on the table between them. The bank is calling the entire outstanding balance, not the overdue portion, all of it. Emily picked up the letter. She read the figure at the bottom. It was large, not unpayable, not ruinous in isolation, but unpayable in 60 days for a ranch that operated on seasonal revenue cycles and had been carrying the weight of 3 years of grief-adjacent financial inattention. She set the letter down. Holloway moved faster than I expected, she said. He's better at this than I gave him credit for, Nathan said. There was no self-pity in it, just the assessment of a man adjusting his calculation based on new information. He knew Whitfield had filed. He had someone watching the federal court records. He paused. Or he had someone inside Whitfield's office. Emily looked at him. Do you think Whitfield? No, Nathan said immediately. Not Whitfield. But Whitfield has clerks, and clerks have families, and families have debts, and Richard Holloway has been purchasing convenience for 30 years. He pushed back from the table and stood. I need to go see the bank manager, Hennessy. I've known him for 6 years. He may not be able to stop the acceleration, but he'll tell me honestly what the options are. I'll come with you, Emily said. He looked at her. She looked back. They had stopped having the argument where he told her she didn't need to be involved in something, and she told him she was involved whether he liked it or not. They had run that argument twice in the first week after Whitfield arrived, and both times Emily had won it on the merits, and Nathan had conceded without pretending he hadn't, which was one of the things she had come to understand was specific to him, his particular ability to change position when the reasoning required it, without the wounded performance that most men attach to being shown they were wrong. They rode into town together. The bank was a solid stone building on the east end of the main street, 2 stories, with the permanent, slightly intimidating presence that financial institutions cultivated deliberately. In 1887, we are here, we are permanent. Your money is safer inside us than anywhere else. Please do not ask us difficult questions about how we make our decisions. August Hennessy, the manager, was a compact man in his early 50s with a careful, precise manner and the expression of someone perpetually balancing competing obligations against each other and never quite finding the balance satisfying. He greeted Nathan by name and Emily with the slightly flustered courtesy of a man encountering a woman in a professional context he had not prepared for. He brought them into his office and closed the door, which was a good sign. Men who are going to deliver news they are ashamed of tend to close doors. Nathan, he said. He looked at the letter Nathan set on his desk between them. I want you to know that this did not originate from this office. I know that, Nathan said. The instruction came from the regional office in Helena. I received it Tuesday. I sent the letter Friday because I needed those 3 days to determine whether there was any discretion available to me at the local level. He folded his hands on the desk. There is very little. What's very little? Emily said. Hennessy looked at her. Then he made a decision and addressed her directly, which she appreciated. I can extend the notification period from 60 days to 90. That's the extent of my local authority. The acceleration itself was ordered from Helena, and I cannot reverse it. Who ordered it from Helena? Emily said. Hennessy was quiet for a moment. The instruction came through the regional director. And the regional director's name? Another pause. Hennessy was a man in an uncomfortable position, doing the math of how uncomfortable various outcomes would be, and trying to find the path of least damage. James Alderton, he said. He was appointed to the position 8 months ago. Emily wrote the name in the small notebook she had taken to carrying separately from the original. A working notebook, for current information, distinct from the historical record pressed against her ribs. And Mr. Alderton's background prior to his appointment? Hennessy looked at her with the expression of a man who has just understood that the woman across his desk is not a bystander. Railroad financing, he said quietly. Out of Billings. The Billings District. Richard Holloway's territory, where he had been building his network of financial and judicial relationships since before Emily was old enough to understand what a network was, or why a man would need one. She made another note. "Thank you, Mr. Hennessy," she said. "I should tell you." Hennessy stopped, started again. He was looking at his desk. "I've been the manager of this bank for 11 years. I knew Nathan's wife. I know what this ranch represents to this community, and what it represents to Nathan personally." He looked up. "I am telling you these things because I believe in the legal and fair operation of financial institutions, and I do not believe that the instruction I received represents either." A pause. "I will also tell you that if a federal inquiry were to examine the circumstances of James Alderton's appointment and the regional office's decision-making in this matter, I would cooperate fully with that inquiry." Emily looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Emily. "I'll let Mr. Whitfield know," Emily said. 90 days, Hennessy had said. It was better than 60. It was still not enough to generate the capital to repay the full balance from ranch operations alone. But it was enough time for the hearing. It was enough time for Whitfield's case to move from preliminary filing to something with real federal weight. It was enough time for the collection of things they had assembled. The notebook, Whitfield's documentation, Margaret Hollis's testimony, Hennessy's willingness to cooperate, to be used in the way that collections of things are used when the moment arrives. The moment was getting closer. Emily could feel it the way you feel weather changing. Not seeing it yet, but knowing it in the body, in the quality of the air. 3 days later, the first property owner came forward. His name was Arthur Denning, and he was a rancher from the north end of the county who had sold 40 acres to a Holloway Railroad subsidiary in 1884 for what the contract said was fair market value, and what Arthur Denning knew, because he had bought the land himself 8 years earlier, was approximately 40% of what it was actually worth. He had not contested it at the time, because the man who came with the contract had also come with 2 other men who had not said anything, but had stood in Arthur Denning's yard in a particular way that made their purpose clear. Arthur Denning had a wife and 3 children and had signed the contract. He had been waiting for 3 years for someone to tell him there was a safe place to put what he knew. Whitfield brought him to the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon. Emily sat at the kitchen table with Whitfield, Arthur Denning, Nathan, and Caleb. And Arthur Denning told his story in the flat, contained way of a man who has rehearsed his anger into something manageable, because unmanageable anger is a luxury he cannot afford. When he was done, Emily opened the notebook and showed him the entry from March of 1884. Richard Holloway and a man named Carver discussing the acquisition of North County land at below market rates using intimidation, and the amount they expected to realize from reselling the mineral rights. Arthur Denning read the entry twice. His face did not change. He put his finger on the date. "That's the week before they came to my property," he said. "Yes," Emily said. He sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, and what crossed his face then was not anger and not relief, but something that was both of them at once. The expression of a man who has been carrying a particular weight for so long that he has stopped registering it as weight, and has just been reminded by the possibility of putting it down that it has been there all along. "My wife always said I should have fought it," he said. "I told her we couldn't afford to fight it. I told her it wasn't safe." He looked at Whitfield. "Is it safe now?" "Safer than it was," Whitfield said honestly. "Not without risk. But the evidence is now substantial enough that Holloway's ability to suppress this through local channels is significantly reduced. Federal jurisdiction changes the calculation. He'll come after my property, Arthur said. Same as he's coming after Brooks. Possibly, Whitfield said. But I want you to understand something. The more people who come forward, the less effective that tactic becomes. He can pursue 1 or 2 people who've isolated themselves. He cannot simultaneously pursue 7 or 8 people who are standing together in a federal proceeding. Arthur Denning was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Who else is coming forward?" "That's what I'm asking you," Whitfield said. "Who do you know who has a similar story?" The second witness came forward 4 days later. Then a third. Then, on the morning of October 3rd, 11 days before the county commissioner's hearing, a woman named Clara Pratt walked into the Autumn Ridge Telegraph office and sent a wire to Whitfield's Helena office that, when Whitfield showed it to Emily and Nathan that evening, made Emily sit very still for a full 30 seconds before she could speak. Clara Pratt had worked as a bookkeeper for Richard Holloway's Railroad Holding Company from 1882 to 1885. She had left the position voluntarily and had said, to everyone who asked, that she had left for personal reasons. What she had not said, what she had carried for 3 years in a private record she kept in a locked box under her bed in Butte, was that she had copied, in her precise bookkeeper's hand, a set of internal company financial records showing payments made to Judge Benton, totaling $11,000 between January 1882 and December 1884. $11,000 for a territorial judge. Distributed across 16 separate transactions, each one structured to look like a legal consultation fee for a different subsidiary company, each one correlating in the records with a favorable ruling in a land or contract case involving Holloway's interests. Emily read Whitfield's summary of Clara Pratt's wire twice. Then she set it down on the table. "She's been sitting on this for 3 years, she said. "She was afraid," Whitfield said. "Same as the others." "What changed?" Nathan said. Whitfield looked at Emily. Word got around that a woman in Autumn Ridge had been keeping records of her own and had decided to use them. The room was quiet for a moment. Emily understood what he was saying. That the thing she had done, carrying the notebook and trusting the right people with it at the right moment, had created a kind of permission that hadn't existed before. That watching one person decide the information was worth the risk had given other people the evidence that the risk was survivable. "Clara Pratt's records and mine together," Emily said. "Is that enough?" Whitfield looked at her steadily. "Miss Carter, with what you have, what she has, Hennessy's cooperation, 3 property owner testimonies, and the county commissioner's hearing as a public forum." He paused. "It is more than enough. It's the case I've been trying to build for 2 years. Nathan reached across the table and picked up the wire. He read it, set it back down. He looked at Emily with the expression she had stopped cataloging and started simply receiving. Direct, complicated, carrying more than it said. "You did this," he said. "We did this," Emily said. "No." He shook his head slightly. "You walked into this town with 43 cents and a notebook that you had the presence of mind to keep for 2 years, inside a situation that most people wouldn't have survived with their clarity intact, let alone with documentation. You—" He stopped. The control he kept on his expression was doing what it did in the late evenings sometimes, working less efficiently, allowing more through than usual. "I want you to let yourself understand what you did." Emily held his gaze. She wanted to deflect. It was her first instinct, the trained reflex of 2 years of making herself smaller. She caught it and held it and let it go. "All right," she said quietly. "I understand it." Caleb, who had been sitting at the end of the table with his coffee, looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man giving 2 other people whatever privacy a kitchen table allows. Whitfield suddenly became very interested in his notepad. The night before the hearing, Richard Holloway made his final move. It came at 2 in the morning. Not Richard himself, not in person, because Richard Holloway did not do things in person that he could arrange to have done for him. It came as fire. The South Hay Barn, set alight from the outside, discovered by Deke Farrow, who was awake with a sick mare in the main barn, and smelled smoke before the fire had gone beyond the first wall. The hands were out of the bunkhouse in 4 minutes. Nathan was out of the main house in 3. Emily came down from the room above the stable in two, because she had not been asleep. She had been lying on her mattress in the particular wakefulness of someone whose body knows something is coming, even when the mind has not yet received the information. They fought the fire for 2 hours. They lost the south barn and the hay stored in it and a set of fence rails stacked against the outside wall. They saved everything else: the main barn, the stable, the equipment, the horses, Storm, who was the most urgent of Emily's concerns, and who, when she reached his pen in the controlled, organized chaos of 30 minutes into the fight, was frightened, but not panicked. He let her put her hand on his neck, and he shook under it, but he did not bolt, did not crash the fence, stood his ground with the specific courage of an animal that has finally learned the difference between a threat and a fear. "Good boy," she said, her voice steady by the force of intention rather than actual steadiness. "Good boy. You're all right." He pressed his head against her shoulder. She stood with him for 2 minutes. 2 minutes she could afford, while the other men had the fire managed. And then she went back to help. By 4 in the morning, the fire was out. In the gray, smoke-smelling pre-dawn, the hands stood in the yard with the exhausted, hollow-eyed look of people who have been through something and have not yet processed it. May was making coffee. Caleb had his hat in his hands and was looking at the ruins of the south barn, with an expression Emily recognized as the expression of a man adding something to a long list of grievances that has just reached a weight he will not forgive. Nathan stood beside the remains of the barn wall. He was not moving. He was just looking at it, the ash and the blackened timber and the waste of it, the deliberate, calculated waste of a man making a point about what he was willing to do. Emily went and stood beside him. "He wants to walk into that hearing this morning knowing I spent the night fighting a fire he started," Nathan said. His voice was very quiet. "Yes," Emily said. "He wants me tired and rattled and thinking about what else he might do." "Yes." "He wants you the same way." "He's miscalculated again," Emily said. Nathan turned to look at her. In the pre-dawn gray, smoke-streaked, with ash on his coat, and the careful control of his expression stripped entirely away by 2 hours of firefighting, he looked more like himself than she had ever seen him. Not the managed walls-up version, but the actual person underneath, the one his wife had loved and grief had buried, and something in the last month had started to unearth. "Tell me why," he said, not challenging her, asking her. The specific ask of someone who needs to hear the true thing said aloud by a voice they trust. "Because he needed to break us last night," Emily said. "He needed us not to show up this morning, or to show up broken. We're going to show up. We're going to show up with ash on our coats, and 3 witnesses, and a federal attorney and a bookkeeper from Butte who kept records for 3 years, and the fact that we spent last night fighting the fire he set is going to be the first thing Whitfield tells that room." Nathan held her gaze. Something gathered in his face. Not quite the fractional smile she had catalogued, but its cousin, the expression that lives in the same family. "When this is over," he said. "When this is over," she said. Neither of them said what came after that. They didn't need to. The sentence was complete in the way that some sentences are complete without their final clause. The meaning carried not in the words, but in the space the words create between two people who have been standing beside each other long enough to know what the space holds. Tom Briggs appeared at Emily's elbow. He was 19 years old, and he had fought the fire for 2 hours, and he had the red eyes and the straight spine of someone who is young enough to still feel the moral clarity of outrage clearly. "Miss Carter," he said. "Storm settled. Fed him a little early. Thought you'd want to know." She looked at him. This earnest, young, decent person who had shown up at 5:30 in the morning to check on a horse, because he had learned to care about the horse from watching her care about the horse. "Thank you, Tom," she said. "That was exactly right." He nodded and went back toward the stable, and Deke Farrow, who was walking past in the opposite direction, stopped and looked at the ruins of the barn, and then at Emily, and said, without preamble, "I'd like to come to that hearing this morning." "You want to testify?" she said. "I want to be in the room," Deke said. "In case anybody in that room needs to know that what happened to that barn last night happened to people on this ranch who know what they saw." He paused. "Man's got a right to stand up for his people." His people. Deke Farrow, who had come into this pen with Storm 4 weeks ago and had come out with a bruised shoulder and a bruised ego, and had been recalibrating ever since. Had just said his people and meant the ranch and the hands and Nathan and Emily, all of them together, which was the kind of thing that happened when shared experience accumulated past a certain point and became something more durable than proximity. "I'd be glad to have you there," Emily said. The hearing was at 10 o'clock in the County Commissioner's Hall, which was a large room above the general store that smelled permanently of wood polish and old paper, and the particular dusty formality of civic proceedings in a small town. By 9:45, every seat was filled and people were standing along the walls. Emily had not expected the crowd. She should have. She knew how word traveled in Autumn Ridge, knew that Margaret Hollis had been speaking to people, that the fire in the South Barn had been seen from 3 neighboring properties, and the news of it had moved through the county before sunrise. But knowing how word traveled and seeing its result standing in front of her were different experiences. And she stood at the entrance to the hall for a moment and simply looked. Margaret Hollis sat in the second row with 2 other women Emily recognized as prominent landowners' wives. Arthur Denning was there with 2 other ranchers she didn't know personally, but whose faces she recognized from town. Silas Webb, from the telegraph office. August Hennessy from the bank, dressed carefully, his expression set with the particular determination of a man who has decided what side of something he is going to be on. Nathan came to stand beside her. He had changed his coat. The ash coat was in May's washing, but his face still showed the night in it, the tiredness and the steadiness both. He looked at the room. "They came," he said. "They came," Emily said. Richard Holloway was already seated at the front of the room, at the table designated for the opposing party. He had his lawyers, 2 men from Billings, polished and prepared, and he had the marshal who had delivered the warrant, and he had his composure, which was the thing Emily had always feared most about him. His ability to remain composed under pressure was the thing that made him effective, and that had made her afraid of him for 2 years, because composure in a powerful man looks like certainty, and certainty in a powerful man looks like inevitability, and inevitability is the thing that makes people stop fighting. He saw her come in. His expression did not change. She looked at him for 1 full second. She thought about every morning she had woken up inside his world and started the day by managing her fear before she managed anything else. She thought about the notebook against her ribs. She thought about Clara Pratt in Butte, keeping records in a locked box for 3 years, waiting for it to be safe. She looked away first, not because she was afraid, but because she was done giving him her attention. I was not the center of this room. He was the reason this room had gathered, which was different. Whitfield was at the front table designated for the presenting party. He had his documentation spread before him, organized with the precise care of a man who has been waiting for this moment longer than the people in this room know. He caught Emily's eye when she entered and gave her a brief, firm nod. She nodded back and took her seat beside Nathan. The commissioner, a man named Aldrich, who had the haggard look of someone who had been briefed that morning on exactly how significant this proceeding was about to become and had not finished absorbing the briefing, called the room to order. Whitfield stood. "Commissioner Aldrich," he said, "before we begin the scheduled matter, I want to place before this hearing a preliminary statement regarding events that occurred on Brooks Ranch in Autumn Ridge between the hours of 2 and 4 o'clock this morning." He produced a document. "I am submitting a formal report, signed by 6 witnesses, alleging deliberate arson on the Brooks Ranch property and requesting that this hearing consider the pattern of conduct it represents." Richard's lead lawyer was on his feet immediately. "Commissioner, this is a contract enforcement hearing, not a criminal proceeding. It speaks to the pattern of conduct of the party seeking contract enforcement," Whitfield said calmly. "The court has the right to consider the full context of the dispute before it." Aldrich looked between them. He was a man trying to find the path of least institutional disruption in a room that had already disrupted past the point where such a path existed. "I'll allow the preliminary statement," he said. "Proceed." Whitfield spoke for 8 minutes. He laid out the fire, the 6 witnesses, the timing relative to the federal filing, the bank acceleration, the pattern. He laid it out the way he laid everything out, precisely, factually, without oratory, which was more effective than oratory because it sounded like truth rather than argument. And truth in a crowded room has a particular quality that argument does not. When he was done, he said, "Commissioner, I would like to call Miss Emily Carter." She stood. She walked to the front of the room. She was aware of every eye in the hall on her. Nathan's behind her, steady and certain. Margaret Hollis's in the second row, sharp and supportive. Richard Holloway's from across the room, flat and calculating. She took her seat. She put the notebook on the table in front of her. The room was very quiet. "Miss Carter," Whitfield said, "can you describe, for this hearing, how you came to be in possession of the document before you?" She looked at the notebook, then at the room. She had rehearsed this. She had been rehearsing it, in one form or another, for 2 years. "I was present," she said clearly, "in the household and business environment of Mr. Richard Holloway for approximately 2 years, from the fall of 1885 until this past September. During that time, I made a practice of recording conversations and business transactions I witnessed, because I believed, correctly as it turned out, that what I was witnessing was not legal and that the record might eventually be needed. And you recorded these things without Mr. Holloway's knowledge?" "Mr. Holloway did not believe that women paid attention to business," Emily said. "He was incorrect." There was a sound in the room. Not quite a laugh, not quite a gasp, something between the two, the sound of a large group of people registering the same thing simultaneously. Margaret Hollis, in the second row, did not smile. But her expression shifted by one precise degree in the direction of satisfaction. Richard Holloway's jaw tightened. It was the first visible crack in his composure. Small. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. Emily noticed it because she had spent 2 years studying his face the way she studied frightened horses, looking for the small signals, the barely visible signs, the truth that lives underneath the managed surface. She looked at him for one moment, and then looked back at Whitfield and kept going. She spoke for 40 minutes. She went through the notebook entry by entry, date by date, name by name, and Whitfield guided her through it with the precise, unhurried skill of a man who has waited a long time for this particular testimony and is not going to rush it now that it has arrived. She named the land transactions. She named the judges. She named the amounts. She named James Alderton, the regional bank director, and watched Whitfield produce the documentation he had assembled from the Helena records, showing Alderton's appointment and its relationship to Holloway's railroad interests. When she was done, Whitfield called Arthur Denning, then the second property owner, then the third. Then, in the moment that changed the temperature of the entire room, he produced the sworn statement from Clara Pratt in Butte, read aloud in full, the bookkeeper's precise accounting of $11,000 paid to Judge Benton across 32 months. And the room went so quiet that the sound of someone shifting in their chair in the back row was audible from the front. Richard Holloway's lead lawyer leaned in and said something in Richard's ear. Richard did not respond. He was looking at the front of the room with the expression of a man watching the calculation. He has staked his world on, come apart, piece by piece, in a room full of witnesses. Whitfield said, "Commissioner Aldrich, the federal case I am building will proceed through federal court in Helena and does not require resolution here today. What I am asking this commission to do is formally record the testimony presented here and transmit it to the federal court as part of the case record. I am also asking this commission to issue a stay of any county-level enforcement actions related to the contract dispute between Richard Holloway and Emily Carter, pending the outcome of the federal proceeding." Aldrich looked at Richard's lawyers. The lead lawyer was on his feet, but his argument had the quality of argument offered by a man who knows he has already lost and is going through the professional motions of making the record. He spoke for 6 minutes. Aldrich listened. Then Aldrich said he would recess for 30 minutes to consider. The room filled immediately with the low, urgent sound of a large number of people talking to each other at the same time. Nathan was at Emily's side before she had fully stood from her chair. He did not say anything. He put his hand on her arm briefly. A brief, deliberate contact, the kind that says, "I am here" more clearly than most sentences can. She covered his hand with hers for a moment. Then she turned to face the room. Margaret Hollis was making her way toward them through the crowd with the purposeful movement of a woman on a mission. Arthur Denning was shaking Whitfield's hand. Deke Farrow was standing against the wall with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has witnessed something he will be describing for the next 20 years. Caleb appeared beside Emily. He had his hat in his hands, and his eyes were red at the corners in a way that had nothing to do with smoke, and everything to do with a man who has been waiting 3 years to see a particular look come back to a particular person's face, and has just seen it. He cleared his throat. "You did good, Miss Carter," he said. "We did good," she said. He put on his hat and tipped the brim to her and turned away before she could see his face properly, which was a courtesy she appreciated. When Aldrich came back 30 minutes later, he granted the stay. Richard Holloway walked out of the commissioner's hall without speaking to anyone. His lawyers followed. The marshal stayed. He had a separate conversation with Whitfield that lasted 15 minutes and concluded with Whitfield folding something into his coat pocket that had the shape and weight of a preliminary arrest warrant application. Emily stood on the street outside the hall in the October afternoon, and the light was the particular flat gold of late Montana autumn, and Nathan was beside her, and Whitfield was explaining the next steps to both of them, and Arthur Denning was on the other side of the street talking to 2 men she didn't know, and the town of Autumn Ridge was going about its recalibration in real time around them. She was aware, beneath all of it, of a sensation she did not immediately have a name for. She turned it over and examined it and understood, gradually, that what she was feeling was the specific lightness of a weight that has been set down after being carried for so long that the carrying had become invisible. She had not felt the weight of the notebook as weight in 2 years. She had only felt it as presence, as necessity, as the thing that justified the carrying. It was no longer pressed against her ribs. She had left it on the table at the front of the commissioner's hall, entered into evidence, where it was no longer hers alone, but the record's, where it could do the work it had been kept for. She breathed in the October air. Nathan said quietly beside her, "It's not over yet." "No," she said, "but it's different now." He looked at her. "How so?" She thought about it. "Before today," she said, "I was afraid of what he could do. Now he's afraid of what I've already done." She paused. "That's a different fight, and it's one I know how to win." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, quietly enough that only she could hear it, "When this is finished, all of it, I want to take down the for sale sign." She looked at him. "I want to take it down because I choose to," he said. "Not because I haven't gotten around to it, not because I don't know where to go, because I choose to stay." She held his gaze. She thought about burned wedding dresses and 43 cents and a name on a folded piece of paper. She thought about an open hand and a silver horse, and the long, careful work of earning trust in a world that had given neither of them much reason to extend it. "I know," she said. "I already knew." The federal arrest warrant for Richard Holloway was issued on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of November, 6 weeks after the commissioner's hearing. Whitfield sent word ahead by wire, so that Nathan and Emily would not hear it first from rumor, which was the kind of consideration that told you everything about the man he was. The wire arrived at the telegraph office at 7:40 in the morning, and Silas Webb's boy brought it out to the ranch before 8, the same boy who had carried Whitfield's first reply weeks earlier, and who now handled communications between the ranch and the outside world with the proprietary pride of someone who understands he is adjacent to important events. Emily read the wire at the kitchen table with her coffee going cold beside her. Nathan read it over her shoulder. The kitchen was quiet, except for May moving at the stove, and the small sounds of the ranch coming to life outside. Boots on the porch, the horses moving in their pens. Tom Briggs's voice saying something to Deke Farrow in the yard that was too low to make out through the wall. "It's done," Nathan said. "The arrest is done," Emily said. "The trial isn't." "No. He'll fight it. He has resources, and he'll spend every one of them." She set the wire down on the table. "But the arrest is done, and the stay is in place, and the contract, my father's contract, is formally suspended pending the federal outcome." She paused. "I'm free. Right now, today, I am free." Nathan said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "You were free the morning you walked through that gate." She looked up at him. "You made yourself free," he said. "The wire just made it official." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down at the wire and let herself feel what was under the words. Not triumph exactly, not the sharp satisfaction she had imagined feeling for 2 years when she thought about this moment. Something quieter. Something that had more in common with a long exhale than a shout. The feeling of a door that has been standing closed for so long, you stopped noticing it as a door, and started experiencing it simply as a wall. And then it opens, and the air on the other side is the same air. But the fact of it being accessible changes everything about how you breathe. May put a fresh cup of coffee at her elbow without comment. It was, Emily thought, one of the most genuinely kind things anyone had done for her in recent memory. The simple, unremarked provision of warmth at the right moment. "Thank you, May," she said. "Drink it while it's hot," May said. "Both of you. There's still work to do." There was still work to do. That was the truth of it. The arrest was not the end. The trial would take months. Whitfield's federal case would require Emily's testimony again in Helena when the time came. And Richard Holloway was a man with resources who would not go quietly. He would hire the best lawyers in the territory. He would construct a defense on the theory that Emily's notebook was the record of a woman with grievances rather than the documentation of a witness with facts. And she would have to stand in a federal courtroom and hold her ground against that argument with the same steadiness she had brought to the commissioner's hearing. She knew all of this. She had known it the morning she handed the notebook to Whitfield. It did not diminish the Tuesday morning. It did not make the wire less real, or the coffee less warm, or the Montana November less present outside the kitchen windows where the first serious snow of the season had been falling since before dawn. She let herself have the morning. Caleb heard the news and came in from the yard and sat down at the table and accepted the coffee May put in front of him and said, "Well," in the tone of a man who has been waiting for a thing for long enough that the arrival of it requires a moment of adjustment. Then he said, "Does your father know?" The question landed squarely in the center of something Emily had been navigating around for weeks. Her father. The man who had signed papers in a room in Billings while she sat in the next room listening. The man who had believed, genuinely and completely, that what he was doing was the best available option for a daughter in a difficult situation. Who had understood debt as a cage that could not be opened and had found what he thought was a key, and had not understood, or had not let himself understand, what the key would cost her. She had written him one letter since arriving in Autumn Ridge. A short letter, telling him she was safe and employed and well. She had not told him about Holloway's arrival, about the marshal, about the hearing, or the notebook, or any of it. She had not been ready to. "I'll write him today," she said. "What will you tell him?" Caleb asked. She thought about it. "The truth," she said. "That it's over. That I'm all right. That the thing he signed doesn't bind me anymore." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "And that I know he was doing what he thought he had to, and I'm not. She stopped, steadied. "I'm working toward understanding it. That's the honest thing to say. I'm working toward it." Caleb nodded slowly. He had the look of a man who has seen enough human difficulty to know that working toward something and arriving at it are different stations on the same road, and that the working toward is sometimes the larger part of the journey. "That's a good letter," he said. She wrote it that afternoon, at the crate table in her room above the stable, with Storm's quiet sounds coming up through the floor beneath her. The particular peaceful movement of a horse who has settled so completely into his home that his presence in it is no longer a negotiation, but simply a fact. She wrote the letter twice, discarding the first draft because it was too careful and the carefulness read as distance, and wrote the second one closer to the truth than comfort, which was, she had decided, the only kind of letter worth sending to a parent, even an imperfect one, even one who had failed you in ways that took years to name. She sealed it and set it aside to go with the next town run, and then sat for a moment with her hands flat on the crate and looked at the east window and the snow coming down outside it in the specific white silence of a Montana November, and let herself be still. She heard the stable door below, and then boots on the stairs, and then Nathan's knock. 3 knocks, not May's 3 but his, which were slightly more deliberate. The knock of a man who is aware he is knocking on someone else's door. "Come in," she said. He opened the door and stood in the doorway, with his hat in his hands and his coat carrying the snow cold from outside, and he looked at the room, her room, the room she had moved into with nothing and had made into something over the course of 7 weeks, with the spare blanket she'd borrowed from May, and the 2 books Caleb had quietly left outside her door, and the small tin cup of dried wildflowers that Tom Briggs had presented to her with excruciating awkwardness on the morning after the commissioner's hearing as a gesture of congratulation, and hadn't been able to explain further without turning completely red. "I took down the sign," Nathan said. She looked at him. "The for sale sign," he said. "From the front gate post. I took it down this morning." He paused. "Caleb helped me get the post out. It had been in the ground a while." A beat. "The post is going to be good for fence repair, solid wood." She did not say anything for a moment. She looked at him standing in her doorway with snow melting off his coat and his hat in his hands, and the expression on his face that had been developing over 7 weeks into something she now had a full name for, and had been not saying the name of because the time had not been right, and she had learned, from Storm, from the long patient work of earning something that cannot be taken, that timing is not a luxury or a nicety, but the actual substance of the thing you are trying to build. The time was right. "Was it heavy?" she said. "The sign?" He considered. The sign was just wood and paint. The 3 years of not taking it down. That was the heavy part. She stood up from the crate. She crossed the small room and stood in front of him and looked at him directly. Not the sideways reading she had been doing for 7 weeks. Not the cataloging and the careful analysis, but the direct looking of someone who has decided to be known and to know. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to be clear that I'm saying it as a choice, not a circumstance," she said. "There's a difference. You know there's a difference." "I know," he said again. His voice was different. The walls he built were still there, would always be there in some form, but they were open in a way she could feel. The way you feel air moving through a space that had been sealed, the specific quality of a door standing open that has been closed for a long time. "I've known for a while." "When did you know?" she asked. "I thought about it honestly, the way he did everything, without performance, with the specific care of a man who takes accuracy seriously." "The morning after Richard came the first time," he said. "You told me you needed the gate and the space, and you walked into that pen with nothing, and Storm put his head in your hand. I thought I knew what I was watching. I thought I was watching someone calm a frightened horse." He stopped. "I was also watching something else, and it took me 3 more weeks to admit to myself what it was." "What was it?" she said. "Someone choosing to stay," he said. "Not because there was nowhere else to go, just choosing." The snow was coming down outside the east window in the thick, quiet way of serious November snow, and the stable sounds came up through the floor, and the warmth of the small room was the accumulated warmth of a space that had been lived in, not long, but genuinely. She reached up and put her hand against his face, and he was still for a moment, the way Storm had been still that first morning in the pen, not resistant, not pulling away, just absorbing the fact of contact and deciding what to do with it. Then he covered her hand with his, and the decision was made. It was not a dramatic moment. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was the arrival of something that had been approaching for 7 weeks through small moments. Coffee before sunrise and fence repairs, and a bolt on a door, and a hand on a lead rope, and a man standing flat-footed in his yard, telling a powerful man no without raising his voice. And the arrival of it felt less like a beginning than like a recognition. Like finding a word for something that has been true for a while and has simply been waiting to be said. She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. He put his arm around her, careful, deliberate, the arm of a man who is very aware of what he is doing and means every part of it. They stood like that for a moment. Just that. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "The east kitchen windows," she said. "Your wife designed them for the morning light." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes, I think about that sometimes," Emily said. "I think about her deciding that morning was the best part of any day and building it into the house so she'd never miss it." She paused. That was a woman who understood what mattered. His arm tightened slightly. Not a lot. Just the small adjustment of a man who has heard something true and has no words for it that aren't already contained in the contact. She would have liked you, he said. She would have liked you from the first morning. The morning I walked in and told you Storm wasn't violent, he was frightened? The morning you walked in, he said. Period. She smiled. He felt it against his shoulder rather than seeing it. Outside, the snow kept falling. The winter settled in over Brooks Ranch with the specific thoroughness of Montana winters. Hard, white, and long. The kind that simplifies the world to its essentials and makes everything else wait. They rebuilt the south barn starting in December, when the ground was frozen and the weather was what it was going to be for months, and there was nothing to do but do it. Nathan designed the new structure slightly larger than the original, with better drainage on the south side and an additional storage loft. Caleb had opinions about the loft. Deke Farrow had opinions about the drainage. Tom Briggs did what he was told, with the enthusiastic reliability of someone who has found a place where being useful is appreciated and has decided to be as useful as possible. Emily worked alongside all of them. She learned to use tools she had not used before, not because anyone asked her to, but because there was work to be done, and she was a person who did the work that needed doing. May, watching her one afternoon through the kitchen window as she helped Caleb notch a rafter, made a sound that was possibly the closest May ever came to expressing open admiration for anything, which was a short, decisive exhale of approval that the recipient was not meant to notice, and Emily noticed completely. She continued working with Storm through the winter. The progress was slower in the cold months. Horses feel weather in their joints and their moods the way people do, and Storm had enough accumulated history to make him sensitive to changes in his environment that another horse might not register. But it was real progress, steady and cumulative, the kind built on the foundation of all the previous month's work rather than despite it. In January, she put a saddle on him for the first time, not to ride, just to put it on him, to let him feel the weight and the cinch and the whole architecture of the thing that represented, for a horse who had been broken by the wrong hands, a very specific history of pain. She spent 4 days just having the saddle nearby, another 3 days laying it across the fence rail so he could investigate it at his own pace. And then one morning, she lifted it slowly to his back, while her hand stayed on his neck and kept talking to him in the low, steady voice she used in the pen, and he shook once, full body, and then stood. She left it on him for 8 minutes that first time. The second day, 15. By the third week, he moved freely under it, not with the complete ease of a horse who has never had a reason to fear it, but with the considered cooperation of one who has decided to accept it, because the person beside him has given him enough reason to decide that. Nathan watched from the fence rail the morning she first walked Storm under saddle in a slow circuit of the pen. He had his coffee. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "He's going to be something." "He already is something," Emily said. "Something the rest of the world can see," Nathan said. She looked at him. He was looking at Storm with the expression that had been replacing the grief-adjacent blankness she had first seen on his face. Not happiness exactly, not yet the uncomplicated version of that, but its working toward, which was the stage that mattered most, and that she recognized as progress because she was in the same stage herself. In February, a letter arrived from her father. She read it alone in her room, sitting on the edge of the bed with her coat still on, because she had taken it straight from May's hand when she came in from the barn and had not wanted to wait. It was longer than she expected. Her father had never been a man of many words in writing, had always expressed himself more easily in the practical language of doing things than in the abstract language of explaining them, and the letter showed the effort it had cost him. The sentences that started and restarted, the crossed-out lines she could see where the pen had gone through them, the places where the handwriting changed pace, as if he was stopping and starting the whole enterprise of saying the true thing. I was sorry. He had used that word, and he had used it specifically, not in the general apologetic way of people who regret an outcome, but not a decision, but in the specific way of a man who has looked at what he chose and understood that the choosing was wrong. He had believed, he said, that Richard Holloway's arrangement would protect her. He had told himself that security was a kind of safety. He had been wrong about the difference between the two. How was not well? The letter said so plainly, the way her father said plain things, without decoration. His lungs. The doctor had been clear. He was not asking her to come back. He wanted her to know he was proud of what she had done. He had heard from a cousin in Billings who had followed the news of the hearing, and that his pride in her was not something he should be taking credit for, because she had done it herself, every part of it, and he was only the father of someone who had turned out to have more backbone than he deserved to have raised. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she went downstairs and out to the kitchen and wrote back. She told him about Storm. She told him about the ranch and the new barn and the snow and the east kitchen windows that caught the morning light. She told him, carefully, in the way that careful is the right way and not the cowardly way, that she forgave him. That forgiveness was not the same as saying the thing was right, that she understood the difference between a man who does harm from malice and a man who does harm from the specific blindness of desperation and love combined. That she was not at peace with what had happened, but she was working toward it, and she told him what she had told Caleb, that working toward something and arriving at it were different stations on the same road, and the working toward was sometimes the larger part. She sent the letter with the next town run and did not wait to feel certain she had said the right things, because she had learned that waiting to feel certain before saying the true thing is how years pass without the true thing being said. Spring came to Autumn Ridge, the way it always came to Montana, not gradually, but in sudden conviction, as if the season had made a decision and was executing it without consultation. The snow retreated from the south-facing slopes first, then from the flat ground, and then one morning the air had a different quality, and the horses in the pasture were running for no reason, except that the ground was soft under them, and the world had opened up again, and running was the right response to that. Emily watched them from the fence rail with her coffee. Not just Storm now, but the 3 young horses she had been working with over the winter at Nathan's request. A project that had evolved from helping with one difficult horse into something that looked, if she was willing to say it plainly to herself, like a calling. People had started coming to the ranch. Not many, 2 in January, 3 in February, 4 in March, bringing horses they had been told were unworkable, asking for the woman who had turned Storm around. She had not sought the reputation. She had simply done the work in a place where people could see it, and reputations build themselves on what people can see. Nathan came to stand beside her at the fence in the April morning. He handed her a fresh cup of coffee to replace the one she had finished. "Arthur Denning wants to know if you'll look at a mare he brought in from the eastern range," he said. "She's been difficult since she foaled last spring. He thinks it's a temperament issue." "It's probably not temperament," Emily said. "It's probably pain. He should have the vet check her back first." "I told him that," Nathan said. "He'd like you to be there when the vet comes." She nodded. Then, "Nathan." "Yes." She turned to look at him. He looked at her with the expression that had a full name now. She had named it in January, privately, and had been watching it become more itself every week, the way things become more themselves when they are allowed to. It was the expression of a man who had stopped waiting to feel safe before he chose, and had simply chosen. "Whitfield sent word this week," she said. "I saw it. The Helena trial date is set for June. I'll need to be there for at least 2 weeks, probably 3. "I know," he said. The ranch will be here," he said. "Caleb can manage. Deke can manage. Tom has gotten surprisingly competent." He said that last part with the specific dry affection that had developed in his voice when he talked about the hands. Not softness exactly, but a warmth that had worked its way into his manner in the way that warmth does when someone stops keeping it back. "You need to finish this." "We both need to finish this," she said. "We both need you to go to Helena and finish this," he said. "Those are the same thing." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I want to talk about the ranch, what it could be." He studied her. "Talk. The horses that have been coming in this spring," she said. "It's going to grow. Word is moving faster than I expected. By fall we could have a waiting list." She turned to face him fully, leaning one arm on the fence rail. I want to formalize it. A separate operation within the ranch. Not horse training in the regular sense. Not breaking horses or producing working stock. Something specific to horses that have been handled wrong. A rehabilitation program. She paused. I want it to be a real thing with a real structure. Not just me doing it informally because people show up. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of uncertainty. The quiet of a man who has already thought about something and is making room for the other person to finish thinking about it too. I've been thinking about the east pasture, he said. It's not being used efficiently, larger than we need for our stock. If we built 2 additional pens on the north end, and a small observation area, Emily said, for when the owners need to watch what I'm doing with their horses. I was thinking the same thing, he said. She smiled. It happened more easily now than it had 7 months ago, the smiling. She had been a person who smiled before Richard Holloway, and she was finding her way back to it. Not the same smile exactly, but a more earned version of it. One that knew more about what it had to stand against, and stood anyway. Partners? She said. He looked at her with the expression. I thought we already were, he said. They went to Helena together in June for the trial. Whitfield had prepared her thoroughly. 3 long evenings in the week before they left, going through the likely lines of attack from Richard's defense, walking her through the mechanics of federal testimony, reviewing the notebook one last time with the particular care of a man who understands that the document has done its primary work and now needs to do its final work cleanly. She was ready. She had been ready, in one form or another, for a very long time. Richard Holloway's defense was exactly what she had predicted. Competent, expensive, and built on the argument that Emily Carter was a woman with a grievance constructing a narrative that served her interests. His lead lawyer was skilled. He was not as skilled as the truth. The truth had documentation, and it had Clara Pratt's bookkeeper records, and it had 3 property owners, and it had August Hennessy from the Autumn Ridge Bank, and it had Emily Carter sitting in a federal witness chair, holding her composure with both hands and answering every question with the flat, unhurried accuracy of someone who has spent 2 years making certain of every fact before she committed it to paper. She was on the stand for 2 days. The second day was harder. Richard's lawyer pressed her on her motives. Her father's financial situation. Her departure from Billings. The circumstances of her arrival in Autumn Ridge. The relationship with Nathan Brooks. Constructing a picture of a woman who had assembled her evidence strategically rather than recorded it honestly. She answered him the way she answered frightened horses. Without aggression, without retreating. With the steady patience of someone who has more time than the pressure being applied to her. At one point, the lawyer said, Miss Carter, isn't it true that you had personal reasons to want to damage Mr. Holloway's reputation and legal standing? Yes, Emily said. The lawyer paused. He had not expected agreement. And you'd admit that personal motivation might color your account of events? My personal motivation to document what I witnessed, Emily said clearly, was that I was a witness to illegal activity, and I believed it should be documented. The fact that I was also personally affected by Mr. Holloway's conduct doesn't change what I saw. It gave me reason to pay attention, which I did. The record is the record regardless of who kept it. She heard, from the gallery, a sound that was not quite audible, but that she felt. The sound of many people simultaneously registering the same thing. She did not look at the gallery. She looked at the lawyer and waited for his next question. He did not have a good next question. Richard Holloway was convicted on 7 counts of bribery and 4 counts of fraudulent land acquisition. Judge Benton was removed from the bench and faced separate criminal charges. James Alderton, the regional bank director, resigned before charges were formally filed, and the charges followed him anyway. 3 land acquisitions were reversed. 8 property owners, including Arthur Denning, received compensation from the liquidation of Holloway's business assets. The forced engagement contract was declared void. Whitfield shook Emily's hand outside the federal courthouse in Helena on the afternoon the verdict was read. He held her hand for a moment and looked at her with the direct, accurate eyes of a man who says what he means and means what he says. You know, he said, I've built cases for 10 years. The evidence makes a case, but the witness makes a verdict. You made this one." "The notebook made it," she said. "The notebook was a tool," Whitfield said. "You were the one who understood what it was for, when to use it, and how to hold it steady when someone tried to take it away from you." He released her hand. "That's not a document. That's character." She thought about that on the long ride back to Autumn Ridge. Nathan rode beside her, and the June countryside was the opposite of the November that had greeted the wire about the arrest. Open and green and loud with the specific aliveness of early summer, the world expressing itself in every direction at once. She thought about character, about what it meant to have it, not as a fixed quality, not as something you simply were, but as something you built in the specific conditions of your life, from the materials available to you, through the decisions you made when the decisions were hard. She thought about Storm, about an animal who had been defined for 2 years by what had been done to him, and who had been, very slowly, given the space to express what he actually was, which turned out to be entirely different, which turned out to be something worth seeing. She thought about Nathan, who had been defined for 3 years by loss, and had built walls against the world that looked like protection, and had functioned as isolation, and who had opened one gate on the morning he held it for a woman with a carpet bag and 43 cents and a look in her eyes that said she intended to stay. She thought about herself, about a woman who had sat in a room next door to a contract signing and had understood, in the specific clear way that people understand things in the moments that define them, that the only power available to her in that situation was the power of knowing something. She had used that power. She had waited and carried it and chosen her moment and used it, and it had done what it was meant to do. The ranch came into view late in the afternoon of the second day, the familiar roofline over the scrub brush, the fence lines, the new barn's slightly lighter timber visible beside the weathered original. Storm was in the east pasture with 2 other horses, and he raised his head when they came through the gate and watched them with the calm, alert curiosity of a horse who knows his people when he sees them. Emily dismounted and went to the pasture fence, and Storm came across the grass at an easy walk, unhurried, carrying himself with the loose, reaching movement of an animal who has found his own stride and is at home in it. He put his muzzle into her open palm. She stood there for the moment with his breath warm against her hand, and the June evening coming down around them, and the ranch making its small familiar sounds. May in the kitchen, Caleb and Deke talking somewhere near the barn, Tom Briggs's voice carrying across the yard in the earnest, slightly too loud way of a young man who hasn't yet learned to modulate. Nathan came to stand beside her. They stood at the fence with Storm's head between them, and the Montana summer spreading out in every direction, and everything they had built in the past 9 months present in the specific quality of the quiet around them. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of enough. Of the right things in the right place. "I want to say something," Nathan said. She waited. He looked at Storm for a moment, then at her. "I've been trying to find the right words for a few months now," he said. "I don't have the right words. I have the true words. I think those might be better anyway." "Say them," Emily said. "I am grateful that you walked through that gate," he said. "I am grateful that you stayed when it was difficult, and stayed when it was dangerous, and stayed when you didn't have to." He paused. "And I'd like you to keep staying. Not because the ranch needs you, though it does. Not because I need you, though I do." He held her gaze with the direct, certain look that was the truest version of him, the one without the walls or the management. "Because you choose to. Because every morning you wake up and you choose this place and the people in it, the same way you chose Storm when nobody else would. The same way you chose yourself when you walked away from that church." He stopped. "That's what I want. Someone who chooses. Not someone who stays because leaving is hard, or because they have nowhere else." Emily looked at him for a long moment. The evening light was doing what the evening light does in Montana in June, making everything gold and specific, and the exact size it actually is, neither larger nor smaller. "Nathan Brooks," she said. "I burned a wedding dress in a churchyard and walked a mile and a half in bad boots to a ranch I'd never seen to ask for work I wasn't certain I'd get, because something in me understood that the direction I was walking was more right than anything that had come before it." She put her hand over his where it rested on the fence rail. I have been choosing since the moment I walked through that gate. I will keep choosing. Every morning. Same as Storm, same as you, same as this place. I choose it because it is worth choosing. Because I am worth choosing it. He turned his hand under hers and held it. Storm stood beside them as the June evening settled over the valley, and the mountains in the distance went purple, and then blue, and then the deep charcoal of coming night. And somewhere in the pasture behind them, the other horses moved through the long grass with the unhurried ease of animals who have come to understand that this particular ground is safe. In the years that followed, people came from across Montana and beyond to bring their difficult horses to Brooks Ranch. They came because they had heard about a woman who understood that fear and violence were not the same thing, and that the difference in how you treated them was the difference between breaking something further and giving it a reason to trust. They watched Emily work, watched her open her empty hand and wait, watched her offer presents without pressure, watched her give frightened animals the evidence they needed to make a different decision about the world. And sometimes, when the work was done and the horse stood quietly, and the owner asked how she had learned it, Emily would think about a Tuesday morning and a burned dress and a long walk in bad boots. She would think about a man who held a gate open. She would think about what it means to be given a door and choose to walk through it, not because you must, not because there is nothing else, but because you have looked clearly at what is on the other side and decided it is where you want to be. She always gave the same answer. The horse taught me that trust is never taken, she said. It is given, freely, by a creature that has finally been shown it is safe to give it. And the man who held the gate open taught me the same lesson. She would pause, because some things deserve the space of a pause. Love that is worthy of the name does not hold. It does not purchase or claim or foreclose. It opens a door and it stands beside you and it lets you choose, every single day, in the full knowledge that choosing requires the genuine possibility of not choosing. She looked at Nathan, who was never far, who had stopped keeping count of the years and started simply living them. We chose. We kept choosing. That is the whole of it. That is everything. And in the east pasture of Brooks Ranch, on a summer morning, with the light coming clean off the mountains, a silver horse stood with his head up and his eyes clear. No longer the animal who had nearly killed 4 men, no longer defined by what had been done to him. Simply himself, fully and without apology, moving through the world in the particular freedom of a creature that has learned, at last, to trust. Some things, once healed, become more themselves than they ever were before. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything.